A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
You know that feeling when the world just flips upside down, and everything you thought you knew dissolves into a fog of betrayal? That was me, standing in the middle of the campus quad on a crisp October afternoon, the leaves swirling around my feet like a chaotic whirlpool of all the emotions I was struggling to process. The sun was bright, casting long shadows across the brick paths, but all I could see was the silhouette of him, Ryan, laughter spilling from his lips as he surrounded himself with his new friends, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. I can still feel the weight of the betrayal sinking into my chest, a thick, suffocating fog that wrapped around my heart. Just a few weeks prior, I had been his world. We shared everything, late-night study sessions in cramped dorm rooms, coffee breaks between classes filled with dreams and plans. I was the girl he told his friends about, the one he promised he would never hurt. But promises are fragile, and trust, well, it can shatter in an instant. It started innocently enough. I had noticed the little things, the way he seemed distracted, the way his laughter didn't reach his eyes anymore. I brushed them off, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. But then the texts came, too frequent and too intimate, and in one suffocating moment, my heart shattered when I discovered he'd been with someone else, right under my nose. Her name was Sarah, another student in our sociology class, someone who looked exactly like the girls I had always felt insecure about. I was furious, heartbroken, and most importantly, filled with a desperate need for retribution. The moment I saw them together, standing too close, whispering in a way that felt intimate, something dark coiled within me. I could feel the rage boiling, simmering under the surface, waiting for any excuse to bubble up. I should have walked away, confronted him, or even just cried it out with friends over a tub of ice cream. But deep down, I knew I needed something else, a plan. I wanted him to feel the fear that I felt, to understand just how it felt to be hunted and haunted by what he had done. And so, as I watched him laugh, clueless and carefree, the gears started turning in my mind. What if I made him think he was being watched? What if I became the ghost in his life, the shadow that lingered just out of sight? I wanted to see the worry in his eyes, the confusion. I wanted him to realize that his actions had consequences. It was a twisted, dark idea, but one that consumed me entirely, pushing me deeper into a world of his own making. Little did he know, I was about to become the phantom of his nightmares. The thrill of the unknown, that intoxicating rush of revenge, began to seep into my veins. I was no longer just the heartbroken girl, I was the architect of his fear. And as I turned to leave the quad, blending into the crowd of students who were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. I spent the next few days lurking in the shadows, carefully plotting my every move. Each moment was a mix of exhilaration and anxiety, as my heart raced with the thrill of the game I was about to play. I watched him from a distance, noting his routines, who he hung out with, and the places he frequented. It felt a little like a scene from a movie, where the villain is carefully orchestrating their grand plan, all while maintaining an innocent facade. Only, in this case, I was both the villain and the victim, the lines of right and wrong blurred in the haze of my anger. One day, as I followed him from class to the library, a wave of doubt washed over me. Was I really going through with this? Did I really want to sink to this level? But the memory of his laughter with her, the way he looked at me with that cold indifference, was enough to push me forward. I had to remind him of what he lost, to resurrect the ghost of our relationship that he had so carelessly discarded. I waited until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors that mirrored my tumultuous emotions. The campus transformed under the evening lights, shadows creeping out from alleyways and corners, making it the perfect backdrop for my revenge. I donned dark clothing, blending into the night like a vengeful spirit. This was my moment to strike. The first night involved simple distractions, moving his backpack a few feet from where he left it, placing an ominous note written in hastily scrawled letters on a bench he frequently sat on. "You're not alone." It was vague enough to keep him guessing, but pointed enough to spark unease. I watched from a distance, my heart hammering as I observed Ryan's confusion turn to anxiety as he found the note. The way his brow furrowed and his eyes darted around was intoxicating. I felt a twisted sense of power surge through me as he looked around, as if searching for an answer in the dark, just like I had been searching for answers after discovering his betrayal. For days, I escalated my tactics. I left more notes, sketchy reminders of my presence. I would hide in nearby bushes, watching as he jumped every time a gust of wind rustled the leaves. I'd occasionally bump into him, acting like a bystander, forcing a smile while I reveled in his discomfort. Even the smallest twitch in his demeanor felt like a victory to me. But it wasn't just fun and games, it was also deeply unsettling. The line between reality and my revenge had become fuzzy. I replayed every moment of our relationship in my mind, scrutinizing every sweet memory while reminding myself of the betrayal. The emotional push and pull was exhausting. I would lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with my conscience. Was I becoming the monster he had made of me? As the weeks wore on, the thrill of my plan began to fade into something darker. I could see the toll this was taking on him. His carefree laughter had been replaced with a nervous, furrowed brow, and it struck me that I had turned him into a shadow of the person I once loved. I found myself questioning my own motives. Was this revenge or merely an act of desperation to regain some semblance of control in my life after he had shattered my heart? One evening, as I watched him from a distance, I caught sight of him with his new friends, the same ones he had laughed with so easily when all was right in his world. Now, they were scanning the area with worried expressions, whispering among themselves about the strange occurrences surrounding Ryan. A chill swept through me as I observed the anxiety etched on their faces. It was a moment of clarity, one that struck like a bolt of lightning. I was no longer merely playing a game of revenge, I was responsible for instilling fear, a feeling I had so desperately fought against when I discovered his betrayal. In my twisted sense of justice, I had relinquished my own humanity. The thrill of seeing Ryan jump at shadows and glance nervously over his shoulder began to feel like a poison coursing through my veins, tainting the satisfaction I once sought. There I was, cloaked in darkness, but instead of feeling powerful, I felt hollow, the joy of my revenge fading like the dying light of the day. The humiliation hit hard when I overheard one of Ryan's friends mention how worried they were about him. "He doesn't even want to be alone anymore," she said, her voice laced with genuine concern. Suddenly, I felt sick. I had successfully turned him into a prisoner of his own mind, a shell of the guy I used to know, and it gnawed at me. I wanted him to feel the pain of betrayal, yes, but I never wanted to ruin his life. That night, as I lay in my darkened room, the shadows felt different, heavier. They were no longer filled with the electric thrill of my plan but weighed down by the guilt and doubt I was now grappling with. I tossed and turned, my mind repeating the mantra, "This isn't who I am." I could hear the echoes of my friends' laughter, feel their warmth, and I suddenly longed for that connection again. Instead, I was isolating myself, pushing everyone away while I dwelled in this dark space of retaliation. The following day, I decided to change my tactics. I hoped maybe I could find some balance, alleviate the torment I was inflicting. I left a note for him, one that felt like a glimpse of my fractured self: "You don't have to be afraid." It was cryptic, yes, but meant to convey that I was done playing games. I didn't want to terrorize him, I just wanted him to understand the weight of what he had done. But when I saw him receive the note, trembling hands, eyes wide with confusion and fear, I realized I had underestimated his response. As he read the words, he looked around, searching for answers, relief spilling over into the worried expressions of his friends who had begun to gather around him. They whispered, glancing at me, and for the first time, I felt myself being pulled back into the shadow of my own creation, a mere spectator to the chaos I had unleashed. As the days passed, I noticed something darker brewing inside me. The lines I had tried to navigate became grotesquely blurred. I suffered from sleepless nights, riddled with guilt, yet I continued my charade. I couldn't bring myself to face Ryan directly, terrified he'd see the truth in my eyes, the anguish behind the mask I wore. Instead, I slipped further into my role as his specter, haunting him with a chilling presence that kept him unsettled. Then came a moment that would shatter the fragile composure I had clung to. I overheard Ryan talking to Sarah, his voice strained. "I can't take this anymore. I feel like I'm being hunted," he said, his voice breaking, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. My heart sank, a deep ache seeping into my chest. I had become the very thing I had loathed. It was humiliating to realize that the very pleasure I had drawn from the fear I instilled in him had transformed into a sickening weight inside me. I stood against the wall, hidden in the shadows of a nearby building, my heart racing as I listened to him pour out his soul to Sarah, who seemed as perplexed as I felt. She was trying to comfort him, but all I could think was, "What have I done?" "I was just trying to get back at you," I whispered under my breath, as if that could somehow absolve me of the darkness consuming my actions. It felt surreal, listening to my ex-boyfriend, the one I had loved so deeply, voice his turmoil, yet here I was, the source of that turmoil, his phantom, his unseen tormentor. As I leaned against the rough brick wall, the chill of the evening air slipped under my skin, amplifying my sense of unease. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in that moment of betrayal, the piercing realization of his unfaithfulness flooding back with a vengeance. But instead of fueling my anger, it ignited something else, a deep, gnawing regret. I had been hurt, yes, but I had crossed an unforgivable line. I was not just a heartbroken girl anymore, I was a puppet master tugging on the strings of someone else's life, and I was losing control. Watching Ryan break down in front of Sarah, a girl I had once been jealous of, set off a chain reaction of emotions. The initial thrill of revenge was replaced by a pit in my stomach. This wasn't justice, this was cruelty. As he leaned against a tree, shoulders trembling, it hit me like a wave, the final straw had come crashing down. I was not just ruining his life, I was also dismantling my own sense of self in the process. What was I doing? Who had I become? The anger that had been my fuel now felt like poison, suffocating the remnants of my former self. I realized that I didn't want him to suffer endlessly, I wanted him to understand the pain he had caused me, to recognize the gravity of his actions, not to be trapped in a web of anxiety that I had spun. And there it was, the turning point, the moment I decided I needed to end this charade. I watched as Ryan wiped tears from his eyes, frustration bubbling up as he confronted the source of his fears, the ghost I had created. The sight of him like this was like a dagger twisting in my heart. I wanted to scream out, to tell him it was me all along, to confess that I had orchestrated this nightmare. But the fear of revealing myself and the shame of my actions paralyzed me. Staring into the abyss of his despair, I felt a profound sense of compassion transform the bitterness I clung to. I had to take responsibility for my actions, to break this cycle of revenge that had morphed into a cruel game. Instead of lurking in the shadows, it was time to emerge, to confront the mess I had made and reclaim my identity. That night, I didn't leave a note or follow him from class. Instead, I sat alone in my room, wrestling with the duality of my existence, between the heartbroken girl desperate for closure and the vengeful specter I had become. I needed to find a way to let go, to forgive him for what he had done, but more importantly, to forgive myself. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about what had once brought us together, the laughter, the shared dreams, the love we had for one another. It was those memories that now felt like distant echoes, a reminder of the person I used to be before the betrayal consumed me. I needed to create a plan, but this time, it wouldn't be about revenge, it would be about closure. The revenge plan, a path toward healing 1. Anonymity and revelation. I decided that if I wanted to end this cycle, I had to reveal my identity, but in a way that allowed me to step back from the vengeful persona I had adopted. I would write him a heartfelt letter, sharing my feelings of betrayal and hurt, and explaining how my actions stemmed from that pain. I would leave the letter in a place he frequented, like the library desk where we used to study together, ensuring he found it unexpectedly. 2. A confrontation. After he read the letter, I planned to confront him. Not in a hostile way, but as someone who wanted to talk and find closure. I knew this wouldn't be easy, and I anticipated that he might be defensive or even angry. I wanted him to see the real consequences of his actions, but more importantly, I wanted us to discuss the hurt and betrayal we had both experienced. 3. A new beginning. I recognized that healing could only come from understanding. So, in that confrontation, I would suggest that we meet for coffee, an innocent setting where we could both express ourselves honestly. I would tell him that I was ready to move on, but first, we needed to address the chaos I had inflicted on him. 4. Genuine apology. This part would be crucial. I had to apologize for the revenge I had enacted. I needed to acknowledge that while his actions hurt me deeply, what I had done in return was unhealthy and wrong. I planned to let him know that my intent was never to ruin his life, it was simply to make him understand that actions have consequences. I hoped this would lead to a moment of honesty, where Ryan could express his regret for cheating and we could both find some semblance of closure. 5. Setting boundaries. After our conversation, I would set clear boundaries for myself and for him. I had to make it clear that I wouldn't be lingering in his life as a haunting presence anymore. I wanted to reclaim my own happiness and encourage him to do the same, so I would suggest we take time apart, focusing on ourselves. This was about healing and moving forward, even if it meant doing so separately. 6. The final note. The last step would involve a final note where I declared my intention to step away completely from his life. I would document everything I had learned from this experience, how I had lost sight of who I was in my desire for revenge, and how I now recognized the importance of self-respect and healing. I wanted him to know that while I might not be in his life anymore, I wished him well and hoped he could grow from this experience. The obstacles ahead. But even as I mapped out this new plan, doubt lingered. Would Ryan understand my intentions? What if my confession led to anger instead of understanding? Would he even feel remorse for how he treated me or see me as just another ghost from his past? I was terrified of the vulnerability this new plan required. Sharing my true feelings meant opening myself up to the possibility of more hurt, but I knew I had to take the risk. I also had to consider his emotional state. If he was still grappling with the fear I had instilled in him, how would he react to my letter? Would he find it unsettling or enlightening? Questions swirled in my mind like the autumn leaves outside my window, drifting aimlessly without resolution. But I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was done with this shadowy existence. It was time to step into the light, to face the consequences of my actions with courage. The confrontation. The day came. I sat in a small cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee swirling around me, a contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I could see through the window as students passed by, laughter filling the air, a world I felt so distant from. With each minute that ticked by, my resolve wavered. Would he show up? Would he even want to talk to me after everything? And then, he walked through the door. The moment our eyes met, a wave of emotions flooded over me. Ryan looked different, more haggard, shadows under his eyes betraying the sleepless nights he had endured. But there was also a flicker of determination on his face. He walked over, tension crackling in the air between us. "Hey?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Hey?" I gestured to the empty seat across from me, my heart racing as he sat down. Silence enveloped us like a thick fog. We both opened our mouths to speak, only to close them again. The moment stretched, heavy with unsaid words. I could see the apprehension in his eyes, the way his fingers fidgeted with the hem of his hoodie. I knew he was still haunted, still afraid. Finally, I broke the silence, words tumbling out in a mix of urgency and fear. I wrote you a letter. I reached into my bag and pulled it out, sliding it across the table. I think you should read it. His brow furrowed as he picked it up, hesitating, eyes darting from the note to my face. There was a flicker of recognition, of curiosity. He opened the letter, his expression shifting as he read my words, each sentence a fragment of my heart laid bare, each confession a piece of my soul exposed. I wanted you to understand, I continued, my voice shaky yet resolute. When I found out about you and Sarah, I was devastated. I felt betrayed, lost. I didn't know how to cope or how to make sense of my feelings. So, I lashed out in a terrible way. He looked up, pain etched across his features, and I could see the moment the realization hit him. That was you? He asked, the tremor in his voice betraying a mix of fear and disbelief. I nodded. I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted you to feel what I felt. But instead, I became the person I hated. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I could see vulnerability in him that mirrored my own. His shoulders slumped slightly, and the tension in the air began to dissipate. I'm sorry, he said, almost too quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. I messed up, and I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about you. The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of our shared pain. My breath caught in my throat, and the realization that we both had been victims of our own choices hung in the air like a thick fog. I don't want to be angry anymore, I confessed. I don't want this to define us. I want us both to heal. As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of liberation wash over me. The chains of anger and vengeance I had wrapped around myself for weeks began to loosen, breaking under the weight of our shared vulnerability. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Ryan, but for me as well. Ryan looked down at the table, a mix of emotions playing across his face, regret, shame, and a hint of relief. I never meant for things to end up this way, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I messed up, and I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen. But this. What you did. It scared me in a way I never expected. I felt like I was being hunted, and now I can see how that was your pain mirrored back at me. I deserve that fear for what I did to you. As he spoke, I felt the knot in my stomach loosen further. This was the conversation I had longed for but had never imagined would happen this way. Two broken souls, sitting across from each other, each striving for understanding amidst the carnage our actions had created. I don't want you to feel like you're being hunted anymore, I said softly. I know, that fear. I've lived with it. But I'm here now, and I want us both to be free. Not from each other, but from this. I gestured between us, the unresolved tension and hurt that had clung to our past like a dark cloud. Ryan nodded, his expression softening as he took in my words. I never wanted to lose you. You were my safe place, and I destroyed that. I wanted to feel something different, but I didn't realize how much I valued what we had until it was gone. His honesty struck a chord deep within me. I had wanted him to suffer, but hearing him admit his mistakes, witnessing his vulnerability, shifted something inside me. I was tired of carrying the weight of revenge. It was exhausting, and in that moment, I could see that forgiveness could be the most empowering form of closure for both of us. We talked for hours, unraveling the complex web of emotions that had ensnared us both. Conversations flowed freely as we aired our grievances, our fears, and our regrets. I learned about the pressure he faced, the overwhelming expectations at home, and the way he had sought escape in the wrong places. He learned about the darkness I had spiraled into, the loss of self amidst the chaos of betrayal. The moment felt cathartic, almost healing. As we shared our thoughts, I felt the burden of resentment begin to lift. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer, maybe it was empathy and understanding. I could see his struggle reflected in my own, and it became clear that neither of us was beyond redemption. When the sun began to set, casting warm hues of orange and pink across the sky, I felt a sense of finality settle over us. It was time to put the past behind us. I reached across the table, and he met my hand with a tentative touch. "Thank you for being honest with me," he said, his voice earnest. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but it means everything that you're willing to move forward." "I'm not doing this for you," I replied, my heart pounding with sincerity. "I'm doing it for myself. I want to reclaim my life, my happiness. And I hope you can do the same." In that moment, something shifted. We weren't just ex-lovers caught in a web of betrayal anymore, we were two individuals seeking closure and understanding.
Hey everyone! My name is Joanna, and I feel like I need to share my story, a confession, if you will. What started as a seemingly harmless neighborhood dispute turned into a twisted tale of betrayal, anger, and, ultimately, revenge. If you're listening, I hope it serves as a reminder of how quickly things can escalate, and the lengths we go to stand up for the ones we love. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, one of those picture-perfect places where the grass is always manicured, children run freely on the sidewalks, and the smell of freshly baked cookies drifts through the air during the holidays. It was the kind of place where people waved hello to each other, or at least they did, up until last summer. My mom, an unwaveringly kind and gentle woman, has lived in this house for over 20 years. She worked tirelessly to provide for me as a single parent, pouring her heart and soul into making our home a sanctuary. Then there's our neighbor, Greg. He moved in a couple of years ago, and at first, I thought he was just a typical guy trying to fit into the neighborhood. But as I got to know him, I realized he was anything but ordinary. Greg is loud, brash, and, frankly, incredibly rude. He seems to thrive on confrontation, always looking for an argument, always trying to exert his dominance. And trust me, he made it clear that he had no respect for anyone around him, especially my mom. The catalyst for everything that happened came on a sunny afternoon in June. I remember it vividly because the sun shone brightly through the kitchen window as my mom and I prepared lunch together, laughing between slices of fresh avocado and whole grain bread. The smell of the garden roses wafted in, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But then, Greg decided to take his trash out, and what followed turned our world upside down. I don't know what went wrong that day. Maybe it was the way my mom had parked her car slightly askew in our driveway. But whatever the reason, Greg stormed over, his face twisted with irritation. I watched from the kitchen as he got in her face, and I'll never forget the way my mom's smile faltered, her eyes widening in confusion at the venom in his voice. "Why don't you go F yourself, Karen?" He spat, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. My heart raced as I witnessed this interaction. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. How dare he speak to her like that? My mom had always told me to take the high road, to rise above pettiness. But in that moment, all I wanted was to protect her. To lash out, to scream at him to get back into his bubble of a house and shut the hell up. But I didn't. I stood frozen, feeling the fire of injustice ignite inside me. That's when I knew I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't just a simple neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a deeper wound, a call to action. And in my heart, I started plotting my revenge, crafting a plan that would show Greg just how wrong he was to mess with my mom, and ultimately, with me. So, buckle up, because what I'm about to share is not just a story about retaliation, it's a deep dive into the chaos of emotions that come with standing up for your loved ones. Remember, sometimes the decision to fight back can change everything. As I watched Greg's face contort with rage, a familiar anger bubbled up inside me. It was suffocating, like a thick fog that made it difficult to think clearly. My mother, the embodiment of grace, deserved better than this. I could see how hard she was trying to keep her composure, her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. I wanted to rush in, to shield her from his tirade, but instead, I stood there, paralyzed by a mix of disbelief and fury. Why are you even talking to me like that? Mom asked, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. This is my home, and I'm not doing anything wrong. To my horror, Greg laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed off the walls of our home. Your home? Spare me. You think this is your territory? You don't even know how to park a car. You need to listen to someone who knows how to keep a neighborhood running. It felt like a slap in the face. I'd always been proud of my mom's caring spirit. She volunteered at the local shelter, hosted block parties, and always greeted her neighbors with a warm smile. And now, here was Greg, belittling her in public without a shred of remorse. I wanted to scream, to tell him that my mom was the heart of our community, not some nuisance. But I stayed silent, trapped in my own rage. Greg continued his tirade, spewing insults that cut deeper than I could have imagined. You're just some washed-up loser pretending to be a saint. You're a joke, a pathetic little Karen that everyone laughs at behind your back. That was it. It was as if I had been waiting for the dam to break, and his words were the final straw. I could see my mother's face turn pale, her eyes welling with unshed tears that I was desperate to wipe away. I felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce urge to shield her from the wickedness of his words. It was like a switch flipped in me. I finally found my voice, though it wavered with the intensity of my emotion. Greg, why don't you just get the hell out of here? I shouted, stepping into the light. You don't get to treat people like this. You don't get to talk to her like that. His gaze swung toward me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw surprise flicker across his face, quickly replaced by that familiar smirk. Oh, great. The little daughter wants to play hero. How cute. You think you can protect her? Looking back, I realized that my attempt to defend my mom only fueled the fire. The confrontation escalated quickly, Greg hurling more insults, and I matching each one with words of my own. It felt like a scene out of a movie, raw and surreal, but it was very real to me. My mom stood to the side, looking devastated, a woman caught in the crossfire of a battle she never wanted to fight. Tension filled the air, a taut string ready to snap. Finally, Greg turned on his heel, a satisfied grin plastered across his face, as if he'd just crushed our spirits. You think you can just play the victim, don't you? Good luck with that. He called back, his laughter ringing in my ears like a curse. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about the insults thrown. It was the sheer disregard he had for my mother, an honorable woman who deserved respect, not disdain. The betrayal sank deeper than I could have imagined, it morphed into something darker. I felt it twist in my gut, a hunger for revenge. I retreated back into the house, my heart racing. I could feel my mom's eyes on me, a mix of empathy and concern. Joanna, please don't let this get to you, she said softly, her voice shaky. But I couldn't help it. The anger and humiliation festered inside me like a relentless storm. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I sat on my bed, the weight of Greg's words echoing in my mind. I imagined the look on his face when I would make him regret ever crossing paths with my family. I began to formulate a plan, an intricate scheme that would turn the tables on him, that would remind him that words have consequences. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming our dignity. And I was going to show Greg that messing with my mom was the worst mistake he could have ever made. The fire inside me began to burn brighter, fueling the determination that would soon set my plan into motion. And so it began, the countdown to my revenge. The spark of injustice ignited it. The following weeks felt like a slow descent into chaos, each day amplifying the tension that hung in our neighborhood like dark clouds before a storm. Every time I saw Greg's face, the embarrassment and anger from that fateful day came rushing back. I could hardly focus on anything else, my entire world narrowed down to thoughts of revenge and how to reclaim our dignity. It started subtly. I would notice Greg glaring at my mom when he thought she wasn't looking, or muttering under his breath whenever she walked by. It was like he relished the power he had over her, a power I was determined to strip away. One afternoon, I caught him tossing his trash into our yard as he walked by, a smirk plastered across his face, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about his verbal assault anymore, he was taunting us, and every act of defiance chipped away at my mom's spirit. She would come inside after an interaction with him, shoulders slumped, her smile a shadow of its former self. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of what he might do next, how far his cruelty would go. And then it happened, the final straw that ignited the fury burning inside me. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the phone rang. My mom answered, her expression changing to one of confusion. I strained to hear her side of the conversation. "What do you mean, a noise complaint?" "No, we haven't been loud at all." "Yes, I understand, but..." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the local police. Greg had called in a complaint against us, claiming we threw rowdy parties that disrupted the peace. My mom's voice trembled as she pleaded her innocence, trying to explain how we were just a quiet family who had never caused any trouble. But I could see the defeat in her eyes as she hung up the phone. Greg was using the system against us, weaponizing his anger. The thought of him enjoying every moment of our distress pushed me over the edge. I felt like a volcano ready to erupt, and I needed to act. I began to outline my plan, a series of calculated moves that would flip the script on Greg. I decided to play a long game, one that would not only expose him but also embarrass him in front of the entire neighborhood. I began gathering intel on him, piecing together the puzzle of his life. I learned that he had a dog, a notoriously loud and obnoxious bulldog named Spike that seemed to have been bred for chaos. I watched as he would leave Spike outside for hours, the poor creature barking incessantly, disturbing the entire block. That's when inspiration struck. I quietly began to unsettle the foundations of Greg's carefully constructed facade. I'd go to the local dog park, making sure to mention to fellow dog owners how Greg's dog was a nuisance, how he was always barking and how Greg never seemed to care. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread through the neighborhood. Soon, I was hearing murmurs, people commenting on Greg's lack of responsibility as a pet owner. It gained momentum, a tiny snowball rolling down the hill, growing larger with each passing day. I could see the discontent in the eyes of our neighbors as they exchanged stories about Greg's dog in hushed tones. I also discreetly started documenting everything. I installed a few cameras around our home, capturing Greg's antics when he thought no one was watching. Videos of him yelling at Spike, cursing at the mailman, and even throwing trash onto our lawn. Every clip I collected added fuel to the fire of my plan. I knew I'd use that footage when the time was right, turning the neighborhood against him like he had tried to turn us against one another. But the situation escalated even further when Greg retaliated against my growing influence in the neighborhood. Suddenly, our driveway was no longer just a minor inconvenience, it became his focal point for drama. He called the city on us for zoning violations, claiming my mom's garden was an eyesore and a hazard. The doorbell rang one afternoon, and a city inspector stood on our porch, clipboard in hand, ready to critique my mother's pride and joy. "Your neighbor has filed a complaint about your garden," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I'm here to inspect it for potential violations." I felt the heat rise within me, ready to unleash. This wasn't just about my mom's garden anymore, it was an attack on her spirit, her happiness. I watched as the inspector walked through our yard, jotting down notes, and each click of his pen felt as though it was carving a deeper wound in my heart. The inspector was polite, but his demeanor was serious, and I could tell he was trying to remain impartial. My mom stood beside me, her face pale as she watched her beloved garden, a sanctuary she'd nurtured for years, come under scrutiny. As if sensing the tension, Greg leaned against his fence, arms crossed with a smug look on his face. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes, a gleam that said he had won. In that moment, everything crystallized for me. I felt a switch flip in my mind, a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could no longer just sit back and let him tear my mother down. It was time to put my plan into immediate action, no more passive-aggressive tactics. This was about reclaiming our space and our peace of mind. The revenge I had been plotting was no longer a mere thought, it had morphed into a mission, and I was ready to fight for my mom, for our home. After the inspector left, I sat down at my laptop, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I crafted a detailed plan. The first step? Rallying support from our neighbors, those who were also fed up with Greg's antics. I knew they existed, I had overheard enough conversations at the dog park and during grocery runs to realize I wasn't alone in my disdain for his behavior. I created a private group on social media, inviting those who'd shared their frustrations about Greg. It was a small yet significant step, but the reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Soon the group was filling up with messages of support, people sharing their own stories about how Greg had mistreated them or their property. I could feel the energy building, and it fueled my determination. Next, I gathered the evidence I had collected over the weeks: videos of Greg's dog barking incessantly, clips of him arguing with neighbors, fighting with the mailman, and even littering. I was building a case, a digital dossier of sorts, to present to everyone who would listen. I wanted to expose him for who he really was, a bully hiding behind a facade of authority, and I was going to make sure he was held accountable. It was during one particularly heated neighborhood meeting that my plan reached its peak. The topic arose about Greg's complaints against various families, and I saw my opportunity. I stepped up, shaking with adrenaline but resolved. "I have something to share," I announced, grabbing everyone's attention. As I played the clips from my phone, there was a palpable shift in the room. Gasps filled the air as my neighbors watched Greg's outbursts, his disregard for property lines, and the chaos he unleashed on all of us. I saw heads nodding, expressions changing from disbelief to anger. I took a deep breath, trying to harness the nervous energy swirling inside me. "Greg has been bullying us for too long," I asserted, my voice steady, emboldened by the support of everyone around me. "He's been using petty complaints to scare us and control us, but we are stronger than that. We need to stand together. Let's show him that we refuse to be intimidated anymore." It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The moment I finished speaking, a wave of murmurs swept through the room. Neighbors began to nod and share their own experiences, each story adding fuel to a fire I'd started. A few brave souls even spoke up, echoing my sentiments. He made a comment about my garden too. "I caught him throwing trash into my yard last month. My kids are afraid to play outside because of his dog." It felt like the dam had finally burst, and in that moment, I could see the shift in momentum. Greg was no longer the untouchable bully, he was becoming the neighborhood pariah. And then, I saw him, standing at the back of the room, his face a mask of rage as he clutched the doorframe. The realization hit me like a shockwave: I had turned the tide. The power was slipping from his grasp, and he was losing control. In that instant, I knew this was just the beginning. I had ignited a movement, a coalition of neighbors united against one man's cruelty. I was determined to ensure that Greg would not only regret the words he had hurled at my mother but also the way he treated every single one of us. As we concluded the meeting, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had found my purpose in this fight, my pursuit of justice for my mom and our community. The fear that had once gripped me now transformed into a fierce resolve. The next phase of my plan was already forming in my mind, my strategy evolving with as the meeting adjourned. I felt a surge of adrenaline and a sense of clarity wash over me. It was no longer just about my mom and her dignity, it was about sending a message to Greg and reclaiming our sense of community. I had ignited a spark, and now it was time to fan it into a roaring fire. My plan had several key components, each carefully structured to ensure maximum impact. I wanted to make Greg feel the consequences of his actions, not just from my family but from the entire neighborhood. Here's how I mapped it out. 1. Building a coalition. The first step was to solidify the support I had gained during the meeting. I reached out to my neighbors and proposed regular gatherings where we could share our stories and devise strategies to confront Greg together. Each week, we would meet in someone's backyard, sharing snacks and support while tightening our bond. I made it a point to remind everyone how powerful we could be when united, transforming our individual grievances into a collective roar. 2. Documenting everything. I continued to gather evidence of Greg's behavior. I set up cameras strategically around our properties, capturing not just his outbursts but also Spike's incessant barking and the chaos that seemed to follow him wherever he went. I encouraged my neighbors to do the same, recording their own interactions with Greg and his dog. The more footage we collected, the stronger our case became. It was crucial to show that Greg wasn't just targeting us but was a nuisance to the entire neighborhood. 3. Public awareness. Next, I created a neighborhood newsletter, the kind that would normally highlight community events and families' accomplishments. However, I decided to leverage this platform to inform everyone about Greg's ongoing antics. I crafted a special column titled Neighborhood Watch, where I would share not only the genuine community news but also updates on our fight against Greg. I included snippets of our gathered video evidence, anecdotes from various neighbors, and encouraged others to join us at future meetings. The goal was to ensure that everyone knew he wasn't just a local nuisance but a serious problem that needed addressing. 4. Rallying for support. After establishing our community newsletter, I organized a neighborhood block party, an event designed to celebrate our unity while highlighting the need to stand against Greg. I invited everyone, emphasizing that it would be a chance for neighbors to connect, share stories, and voice their concerns. My goal was to create an atmosphere of solidarity that would put pressure on Greg and show him he could no longer operate without accountability. 5. Further heightening tensions. During the block party, I intended to have a few key speakers, people who had endured Greg's bullying firsthand. I encouraged them to share their stories openly in front of the group, amplifying the message that we wouldn't allow his behavior to go unchecked. I envisioned a moment when the collective voice of our community would echo in defiance against Greg, drowning out his taunts. I wanted him to realize that he was outnumbered, and the tide had turned. 6. Writing a letter. After the block party, I wanted to take a more formal approach. With the backing of my neighbors, I planned to draft a letter addressed directly to Greg. In it, we would outline our collective grievances, the events leading up to this point, and the community's expectations moving forward. This letter would serve as an official warning, articulating that his actions had consequences, and if he continued down the path of harassment, we would be forced to elevate matters to local authorities. 7. Escalating to local authorities. Should Greg choose to respond with hostility or continue his behavior without consequence, my plan included enlisting the help of local law enforcement. With ample evidence of his verbal abuse, noise complaints regarding Spike, and our documented experiences, I would propose that we file a formal complaint against him. If necessary, we could even explore the avenue of a restraining order, demonstrating our commitment to protecting ourselves and our families from his aggression. 8. Public awareness campaign. I envisioned one final act that would make it impossible for Greg to escape the repercussions of his actions. I wanted to organize a small rally outside the city council building, inviting local media to cover our story. It would serve as a public demonstration of our solidarity and determination while shining a light on Greg's behavior. I could already picture the news reports, my fellow neighbors standing alongside me, united in our demand for respect and accountability. We would no longer be victims, we would be a force for change. 9. Personal face-off. As a final touch, I planned to have a personal confrontation with Greg. I envisioned a moment when he would feel completely isolated, standing alone as the neighborhood rallied behind me. I would approach him calmly, armed with evidence, and the day of the block party arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. I had never been more nervous in my life, but also fiercely determined. The community had rallied behind my vision, and we had transformed the backyard of one of the more outspoken neighbors into a lively gathering filled with food, laughter, and a sense of unity that had been missing for so long. Colorful banners flapped in the breeze, and the smell of grilled burgers mixed with the sweet scent of lemonade, creating an atmosphere brimming with positivity. But lurking underneath it all was the tension of knowing Greg would likely show up. He always did, eager to assert his dominance. I didn't want to think about how he'd react to the gathering or the fact that we'd all come together to stand against him. For weeks, I had rehearsed this confrontation in my head, preparing myself for the showdown that felt inevitable. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting soft golden rays over the party, I saw Greg approaching. He strutted over, his posture radiating arrogance, his bulldog Spike at his heels. The gleeful chatter faded momentarily as he stepped into our midst, a dark cloud on an otherwise clear day. My heart raced as I locked eyes with him, feeling the collective tension in the air. "Wow, what a pathetic gathering," he sneered, looking around at the laughing families and children playing. "Are you all really this desperate for attention?" "Sad." The crowd tensed, his words cutting through the light-hearted atmosphere like a knife. But I felt my resolve harden. I couldn't let him intimidate us. I stepped forward, taking a deep breath as I prepared to confront him. Greg, this is about more than just a social gathering, it's about standing up against bullying, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. You've harassed my mom and made this neighborhood hostile for so many of us. We refuse to let you get away with it any longer. Laughter faded to silence, and I could feel the collective energy shift as my neighbors began to gather behind me. Greg's smug expression faltered slightly, and that made me bolder. You think you can bully us into silence, but we're done being quiet, I continued, my voice rising with conviction. We're here to show you that we're united, and we won't let you tear us apart anymore. Greg's eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger boiling within him. You think you're all so clever, don't you? He spat, stepping closer. This little charade won't change anything. You're nothing but a bunch of losers crying for attention. You think you can take me down? I swallowed hard but pressed on. You underestimate the power of community, Greg. Together, we're stronger than you'll ever be. In that moment, I saw the shift in my neighbors. Heads nodded in solidarity, their expressions shifting from fear to empowerment as they stood with me. One neighbor, an elderly woman who had kept quiet for far too long, stepped up beside me. We're tired of your behavior, Greg. It's time you realize that we won't tolerate your bullying any longer. The crowd began to murmur in agreement, emboldened by the shared sentiments of frustration. I could feel the energy rising, a unifying force pushing back against Greg. The tide was turning. Greg's demeanor darkened, and his bravado began to crack under the weight of our collective strength. You think you can just come together and intimidate me? He barked, looking around for support, but found none. You all don't know what you're messing with. That's when I decided to leap into action. I produced the letter we had drafted together, filled with the collective experiences of my neighbors, along with the evidence we had gathered. We're not just voicing our grievances, we're standing here letting you know we have documented everything you've done. With trembling hands, I held up the papers, the weight of countless stories of fear, anger, and hurt, translating into tangible proof of his reign of terror. I continued, we're not afraid to take this to the authorities. You've crossed a line, and it ends here. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in Greg's eyes, the bravado slipping from his grasp. This is ridiculous, he shouted, trying to regain control of the conversation, but the energy around him was shifting. We're not here to argue anymore, I declared, feeling the thrill of empowerment surging through me. We're here to take our neighborhood back. The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of hope washing over us. The power of community was palpable, and suddenly Greg looking back, it's surreal to think about how that one confrontation changed everything. The energy at the block party was electric, the roar of our united voices drowned out Greg's attempts to regain control. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could reclaim our neighborhood from his grasp. Greg's reaction was as explosive as I had feared. With the crowd against him, he sputtered a few more insults, but they fell flat in the face of our collective resolve. As he stormed off, I could see the realization dawning on his face, this wasn't just a petty brawl anymore, it was a full-blown revolt. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect of that day became evident. Word of the block party and our united front spread throughout the neighborhood. My neighbors began coming together more than ever, hosting potlucks and gatherings, sharing laughter and stories we hadn't exchanged before. The sense of community that had been slowly eroding was being rebuilt, brick by brick, laughter by laughter. But Greg wasn't willing to take his defeat lying down. He retaliated, of course, attempting to vilify me and my family to anyone who would listen. He spread rumors, claiming that we were the real troublemakers, that our noise complaints were fabricated, and that we were trying to bully him out of his own home. I knew he thrived on chaos, and it was almost predictable how he'd act. Yet, with the support of my neighbors, it didn't matter as much as it once had. We organized a neighborhood watch, a simple yet effective means to keep an eye on each other and address any further tumult. I even reached out to the local police, who were surprisingly supportive after hearing our accounts. It felt liberating, knowing we had resources to back us up if needed. It wasn't long before they began patrolling the area more frequently, just a simple presence was enough to deter Greg from his antics. As time went on, The tension between us simmered down, but the scars from the ordeal remained. Greg would still glare at us from his porch, attempting to assert his dominance with nasty looks, but they no longer held any power. Each time I saw him scowling, I felt the thrill of victory surge through me. I was reminded that my actions had made a difference. The collective strength of our neighborhood had put an end to his reign of bullying. Then came the day of reckoning. We had invited the local news to cover our communal efforts to reclaim our neighborhood. I stood there, proud as I watched my neighbors recount their experiences and share stories of how we had come together. The piece aired just before the evening news, and what followed was a wave of support from others in the community who faced similar struggles. However, I never expected Greg's reaction. He came over that evening, furious as ever, demanding to know why we put him in such a negative light. It was surreal to see him so unhinged, so desperate. "You think this is over?" He spat, face red with rage. I stood my ground. "It was never about being over, Greg. It's about understanding that we won't let you bully us anymore. Your actions have consequences, and we're just getting started." With that, I turned my back on him, feeling the solidarity of my neighbors behind me. The sense of closure was palpable. For all his threats and bluster, he had lost the power he once wielded so effortlessly. Months passed, and slowly, Greg faded into the background of our neighborhood's dynamic. He still lived there, but his presence was muted. He learned the hard way that the community wouldn't tolerate his behavior any longer. It was during one of our neighborhood gatherings, where the laughter rang out like music, that it hit me: we had transformed. The community once splintered by fear was stronger than ever, forged in the fires of conflict. Yet, as I sat back, watching my mom laugh with neighbors she had never really talked to before, a deeper thought lingered in my mind. Revenge had given way to something more profound, a sense of belonging, unity, and understanding that comes only when we're willing to fight for each other. But at what cost? Did it change my relationship with Greg? Did it change me? I pondered the complexities of human nature and how revenge can ignite a fire, but it can also illuminate the path to healing. In reclaiming our neighborhood, I had also learned the true power of compassion and community support. As I gazed at the joy surrounding me, I realized that sometimes, it's not the act of revenge that defines our journey, but rather the lessons we learn along the way. I would forever treasure the strength of my neighbors, the resilience of my. Hey there, my name is Joanna. I'm a 32-year-old marketing professional living in a cozy little suburban neighborhood that's supposed to be a peaceful haven, you know? The kind of place where you wave to your neighbors and have block parties in the summer. But let me tell you, peace is a fragile facade, easily shattered by a single obnoxious act. It all began on a crisp October evening, just as the leaves were turning shades of fiery red and orange. I had just returned from a long day at work, exhausted and looking forward to curling up on my couch with a cup of chamomile tea and a good book. But as I pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. There it was, Kyle. My neighbor, a self-proclaimed car enthusiast, had parked his monstrous lifted truck right next to my petite sedan. His truck was a behemoth, towering over my car like a hulking giant. And to top it all off, he left just enough space for me to barely squeeze in without risking a scratch on my already battered paint job. Kyle was everything I despised about my neighborhood, a loud, egotistical man whose idea of fun seemed to involve revving his engine at all hours and blasting music that rattled the windows of my home. He boasted about his truck like it was a trophy, often mocking my car's modest size whenever the chance arose. We didn't have a history per se, but I had learned to keep my distance from him. His arrogance was an impenetrable wall, and I had no desire to scale it. As I fumbled to get out of my car, I could already feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time Kyle had pulled this move. In fact, it felt almost like he was testing the waters, pushing my patience to see how far he could go. My heart raced as I imagined confronting him, the words building up in my throat, but part of me hesitated. Would it even matter? Would a drunken rant simply fuel his ego further? As I glanced at my cramped driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that my kindness and patience had been mistaken for weakness. And that's when the idea hit me, a spark igniting in the back of my mind. What if, instead of letting him get under my skin, I turned the tables? The thought was audacious, and I could almost hear the thrill of vengeance whispering in my ear. But as I stood there, staring at the monstrous truck that occupied my space, a sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't going to let Kyle's arrogance go unchecked anymore. No more playing the role of the nice neighbor while he tramples all over my boundaries. The lines had been drawn, and like a dormant volcano ready to erupt, I could feel the simmering rage building within me. Little did I know, this would set off a chain reaction that would not only shake the foundation of our neighborhood dynamics but also teach Kyle a lesson about respect. As I took a deep breath, I realized this was just the beginning. I hadn't even stepped inside my house when the storm of emotions surged within me. I tossed my bag onto the kitchen counter and paced back and forth through the narrow hallway. A knot tightened in my stomach as I replayed the scene. Kyle, standing by his truck, casually tossing me a dismissive glance as if my irritation was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance to him. It wasn't just about the parking, it was the principle of it all. You see, I had always prided myself on being the calm, collected neighbor. The one who offered freshly baked cookies during the holidays and organized the annual community cleanup. I wanted to be that neighbor, someone who brought people together. But Kyle's blatant disregard for basic decency made me question everything. How could someone be so inconsiderate? He made a mockery of my efforts to foster a friendly environment, and his arrogance felt like a personal slap in the face. He had crossed the line, and each time I saw that truck parked too close to mine, it felt like a reminder of his power over me. It was infuriating. I was usually the type to give people the benefit of the doubt, but Kyle made that impossible. Every time I had to squeeze into my own car, every time I heard his engine roar to life at an ungodly hour, I could feel my skin crawling. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a daily reminder that he didn't respect me, or anyone else, for that matter. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I found myself tossing and turning, unable to shut my mind off. Why should I let him win? I thought. He didn't know me. He didn't know the hours I worked just to afford a safe place to live, the sacrifices I made to keep my life afloat. He was a reminder that some people took pleasure in wielding their privilege like a weapon, and it struck a chord deep within me. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I woke up with a newfound resolve. I would no longer let his rude behavior dictate how I felt or how I lived. It was time to show Kyle that he wasn't the only one who could play games. I had a few tricks up my sleeve, after all. I started small. Instead of parking in my usual space, I pulled my car to the very edge of my driveway, leaving just enough room for him to squeeze in on the other side. Each time he entered and exited his truck, I watched through my window, feigning innocence while secretly reveling in the irritation I could see on his face. It was satisfying, almost therapeutic, to see that he wasn't as invincible as he thought. But then things escalated. My friends, noticing my discontent, encouraged me to take bolder steps. Why not put a note on his windshield? One suggested, her eyes gleaming with mischief. As I considered it, I found myself grinning, even laughing at the thought. I realized that under my layers of frustration, there was a part of me that hadn't felt this alive in years. The next day, I printed out a small, sarcastic note, "Hey Kyle, I love your truck. It makes my car look even smaller." I slipped it under his windshield wiper before I rushed to my car, heart pounding with adrenaline. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of him walking toward his truck, confusion written all over his face. I chuckled, the tight knot of anger slowly loosening as I imagined his reaction. But Kyle's retaliation was swift. He responded with a sharply written note of his own and shoved it into my mailbox, full of bravado and threats that he'd take care of the little car issue if I didn't back off. I felt my heart race, a mix of anger and fear igniting within me. This wasn't just a game, it was turning into a war. But part of me felt invigorated. I was no longer just the nice neighbor. I was fighting back. As I stood in my kitchen, staring at the note, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. This was not just about a parking space anymore, it had become very personal. I was reclaiming my space, not just in the driveway but in this neighborhood, in my life. I could feel the scales tipping, and the thrill of vengeance coursed through me. I was determined to win this battle, whatever it took. And that's when I knew, this was just the beginning. The days that followed turned into a relentless cycle of cat and mouse, and what I thought would simply be a harmless game escalated into a full-on war. Kyle, oblivious to the fact that he was fighting against an underestimated woman, began acting out with even more audacity. It was as if my little jab had awakened a sleeping giant, and now he was determined to assert his dominance in the most obnoxious ways possible. Each morning, I woke up with a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. Would he park even closer to my car today? Would he retaliate with another nasty note? The tension in the air was palpable. And it wasn't just about the parking anymore, it was the idea of reclaiming my territory. I felt like a queen defending my castle, emboldened by the thrill of battle. One evening, as I returned home from work, I couldn't help but notice that Kyle had moved his truck even closer than before, so close, in fact, that I was forced to park on the street rather than deal with the frustration of squeezing into my own driveway. The glare of my headlights caught the glint of his truck's chrome rims as if they were mocking me. That was it, I had reached my breaking point. In an impulsive rush of anger, I decided to take my tactics up a notch. I posted a series of exaggerated warnings on our neighborhood's Facebook page, cleverly crafted but dripping with sarcasm. Attention! There's a monster lurking in our neighborhood, beware the lifted truck that terrorizes small cars. I even included a picture of Kyle's truck, distorted with a funny filter that made it look like a cartoonish bull. The likes and responses flooded in, my friends rallied around my cause, encouraging me and sharing their own stories of inconsiderate neighbors. But as the attention on my post grew, so did Kyle's fury. That night, I heard his truck rumbling to life at 2 a.m., the sound reverberating through my walls, shaking my very foundation. My heart raced as I peered through the curtains, seeing Kyle sitting in the driver's seat, the headlights illuminating him like a spotlight in a twisted drama. He was clearly trying to send a message, he wouldn't back down easily. The following day, I woke to an unexpected surprise. My car was covered in a layer of sticky, dripped-down substance, maple syrup. I couldn't believe my eyes. A wave of fury washed over me as I realized that Kyle had resorted to childish antics. The viscous liquid clung to the paint, and as I wiped it away with a rag, I felt my resolve hardening. This was war, and I couldn't just sit back and allow my emotions to dictate my actions anymore. I needed to hit him where it hurt, the one place a car enthusiast holds dear, his precious truck. I spent the next few days concocting a plan, all while maintaining my cool facade. As he pranced around the neighborhood, boasting about his truck to unsuspecting neighbors, I bided my time, my heart racing with anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. I knew Kyle had a car show coming up that weekend, a big event where he'd be showing off his beloved truck to a crowd of admirers. And that's when I seized my opportunity. Armed with a can of spray paint, I transformed my plan of attack into something that would leave a lasting impression. With careful precision, I scrawled my truck's bigger than your ego across the back of his vehicle, not something that would damage the paint, but something that would definitely draw attention. As I stood there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. What if I got caught? What if this escalated beyond my control? But part of me reveled in the thrill of being a rebel, standing up against the bully in our neighborhood. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of commotion outside. Curious, I peered out the window and found a small crowd gathered around Kyle's truck, their delighted laughter cutting through the air like music. I felt a pang of satisfaction as I observed Kyle's face twist in disbelief and rage, the words I had painted glaring back at him under the bright sunlight. But then he saw me. Our eyes locked for a split second, and I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. A mix of shock and fury washed over his face, and I could feel the heat of his glare as he stormed toward my house, fists clenched and jaw set. The excitement of the crowd dimmed as they sensed the tension brewing between us, our little feud now a spectacle for all to witness. "Joanna," he shouted, his voice slicing through the chatter of the crowd like a knife. "You think this is funny? You think you can just disrespect my property like that?" I stepped out of my house, heart racing, but I stood my ground. "You crossed the line, Kyle. You've been a total jerk, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me." I could feel the adrenaline pulsing through my veins as I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos. His face flushed crimson, and for a moment, I thought he might back down. But instead, his rage only deepened. You don't know who you're messing with. This isn't over, Joanna. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a rush of victory mixed with a sense of dread. I had provoked the beast, and now there was no turning back. This was no longer a simple dispute over parking, it had transformed into a bitter rivalry that threatened to consume both our lives. The stakes were higher than ever, and as I lay down that night, the weight of what I had done settled heavily on my chest. I was in deep, and I had no idea how far Kyle would go in retaliation. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. I could feel it, the fight was intensifying, and I was ready to meet him blow for blow. There was no backing down now, I was in it to win, no matter the cost. The following week felt like a fever dream, each day straddling the line between exhilaration and dread. I wasn't just a woman fighting back against an obnoxious neighbor anymore, I was caught in a whirlwind of escalating tension, and every moment seemed to push me further into this bizarre rivalry. Kyle was fueled by my little graffiti stunt, and retaliation seemed imminent. The night after the crowd had dispersed, I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the thought of what Kyle might do next. Visions of his furious face swirled in my mind, an unsettling mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. What if he comes after me? I wondered. What if he vandalizes my car? What if he tries to intimidate me? But then I remembered the thrill I felt when I painted those words on his truck, the rush of reclaiming my space, my dignity. The very act of taking a stand had awakened something inside me that I thought I'd buried long ago. I wasn't just Joanna, I was a force to be reckoned with. It was a powerful realization, one that made my heart race with possibilities. The next afternoon, as I returned home from work, I spotted Kyle parked in front of his house, his truck gleaming under the afternoon sun. He was pacing back and forth, phone to his ear, probably ranting about me to someone. His demeanor radiated an arrogance I had grown to despise. But instead of fear, I felt something shift within me, a sense of defiance that I couldn't ignore. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of opportunity in the chaos. Kyle had left his garage door wide open, revealing an enticing array of tools and shiny accessories for his beloved truck. A thought flickered through my mind, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The turning point had arrived. In a heartbeat, I felt the thrill of revenge coursing through me again, but this time, it was different. Instead of the rash decision to vandalize, I envisioned an act that would strike where it hurt most, his pride. I could imagine the look on his face if I managed to make a fool of him at his own game. It wasn't about destruction, it was about humiliation. I quickly formulated a plan as I stood there, my heart racing with excitement. I approached him under the guise of civility, forcing a smile and waving. "Hey, Kyle. Nice truck you got there." He shot me a glare that could curdle milk but was too preoccupied to engage me. I couldn't help but feel a rush of power in knowing that I was under his skin. I was thinking about throwing a little parking competition, I began, carefully watching his reaction. You know, to see who can park the best in our little neighborhood. Winner gets bragging rights, and maybe a trophy. The moment I suggested it, I felt a surge of energy, a gleeful spark igniting my plan. Kyle's brow furrowed, and for a second, I thought he might scoff at the idea. But then I saw it, a flicker of intrigue beneath his irritation. "What's this? You think you can outpark me?" He challenged, crossing his arms over his chest, his ego visibly puffed up. "Why not? I may drive a smaller car, but I'll show you how it's done," I replied, my voice steady and confident. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as if sizing me up for a battle. "You're on, Joanna. Just remember, you asked for it." As he accepted the challenge, I felt the adrenaline rush through my veins like a drug. The gears in my mind began to churn as I crafted a plan that would leave him utterly baffled. I wanted to turn his arrogance against him, to orchestrate a spectacle that would draw the entire neighborhood's attention and make him question his own pride. It was all too perfect. I could already envision the day of the competition, a crowd of curious neighbors gathering around as Kyle, filled with confidence, would underestimate my determination. It was clear to me now, the stakes had never been higher, and I was prepared to flip the script, to take my revenge in a way that was as poetic as it was satisfying. The thrill of it all left me breathless. I could see my victory, even before the competition began. By turning the gathering of spectators into an audience for my retribution, I was no longer just Joanna, the nice neighbor. I had transformed into a challenger, ready to unveil the foolishness of my neighbor's ego while simultaneously reclaiming my standing in the community. As the sun began to set that evening, casting a warm golden glow across the neighborhood, I stood outside, heart racing as I lit the spark of my plan. This wasn't just an act of revenge, it was my way of taking back control, transforming the narrative, and finally showing Kyle that he had underestimated me all along. I didn't need to resort to petty vandalism or childish antics. Instead, I would use his own arrogance against him. The turning point had arrived, and I was ready to show Kyle, and everyone else, what it truly meant to take a stand. This was just the first act in a much larger drama, and I was ready to steal the show. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over my front yard, I felt a surge of confidence wash over me. I had a plan, and it was time to execute it with precision and flair. The upcoming parking competition would be the stage for my revenge, where I would artfully weave a narrative that turned Kyle's arrogance into a spectacle of humiliation. I knew I couldn't pull this off alone. To really make an impact, I needed the support of my fellow neighbors. After all, it was their laughter and camaraderie that would amplify the thrill of my victory. I began by casually mentioning the idea to a few close friends and sympathetic neighbors during our morning walks and coffee runs. I painted a picture of a friendly competition, filled with laughing children, cheering adults, and a homemade trophy that I would craft myself. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. "Oh, I'd love to see Kyle's face when he loses," one neighbor exclaimed, while another chimed in, "Count me in. I'll bring snacks for the crowd." Before I knew it, there was a buzz around the neighborhood about the impending showdown, and my heart raced with excitement. I decided to officially announce the parking competition on our community Facebook page, cleverly branding it the Suburban Showdown, Park Wars Edition. I outlined the details, promising fun, food, and, of course, a trophy for the winner. I cheekily included a photo of my car, a small, unassuming sedan, next to the monstrous silhouette of Kyle's truck, playfully captioned, "Let's see if size really matters." The post went viral within our little neighborhood, and soon it filled with comments from amused neighbors eager to witness the event. I could visualize the anticipation building, the laughter echoing, and Kyle would be none the wiser as he prepared for his grand display of arrogance. The day of the competition arrived, and I was up before dawn, painting a makeshift trophy in my living room, a gold-painted coffee mug mounted on a piece of wood with the words "Parking Champion" written in my best cursive. It was ridiculous, but it captured my spirit perfectly. As I finished up, I could hardly contain my glee at the thought of Kyle's reaction when he saw it. Next, I set the stage in front of our houses. I arranged colorful lawn chairs, laid out a picnic blanket for snacks, and prepared a cooler filled with drinks. I even set up a scoreboard that I made using cardboard, ready to track the parking attempts. This was going to be a neighborhood event, and I aimed to make it as entertaining as possible. As the hour approached, I donned a bright, ridiculous outfit, a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses, hoping to channel my inner cheerleader. I wanted to play up the fun atmosphere, and my neighbor, Lucy, even brought a portable speaker to play upbeat music to enhance the festive vibes. When Kyle finally strolled outside with a swagger, I caught a glimpse of the smug smile on his face, clearly brimming with confidence. He had no idea what he was stepping into. As he made his way to his truck, I called out, "Hey, Kyle. Ready to show everyone how to park like a pro?" His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, but he couldn't dismiss the excitement bubbling around him. With neighbors gathering and kids running to grab their seats, Kyle's bravado was met with an audience that was all too eager to see how this would unfold. The rules were simple. Each participant would have one shot to park their vehicle in a spot I had cleverly selected, right next to my own car. The audience would judge based on creativity, precision, and style. I could hardly suppress my laughter as I imagined the absurdity of it all. I went first, expertly maneuvering my compact car into the parking spot with a flourish. I slipped out, bowing dramatically to the cheers of my friends. Not bad for a small car, right? I winked, basking in the applause. Now it was Kyle's turn. He approached his truck, a triumphant smirk on his face as he revved his engine for effect. "Watch and learn, everyone," he bellowed, his confidence palpable as he swung his truck into motion. As he attempted to park, though, things quickly took a turn. Instead of the precision he expected, he miscalculated the distance and ended up encroaching on my side of the driveway, wheels on the line, inching dangerously close to my precious little car. The chorus of gasps from the audience was music to my ears. As he climbed out of his truck, adrenaline coursing through him, I made my move. "Looks like you're straddling the line there, Kyle." "Not quite what I expected from the parking pro, huh?" I laughed, the teasing remark earning me a round of applause from the crowd. His face flushed, the smugness replaced with confusion and embarrassment. "This isn't done yet," he retorted, trying to brush it off, but the crowd was already buzzing with laughter. I could see his confidence waning. It was glorious. But I wasn't done. I had one last card to play. I had prepared a surprise for the end of the competition, a mystery judge who would ultimately decide the winner. As the competition wrapped up, I announced, "And now for the final decision, I present to you a surprise guest judge." I had enlisted the help of Mr. Thompson, the grumpy old man who lived at the end of the block. Known for his sharp tongue and disdain for arrogance, he was the perfect choice. As he shuffled over, cane in hand, he surveyed the spectacle with a raised eyebrow. After a few rounds of judging, and with Kyle's truck still awkwardly parked on my territory, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, folks, it's clear who the better driver is. The one who knows how to park without taking up 2 spaces. I give my vote to Joanna." The crowd exploded in cheers, laughter, and applause, and I felt a rush of triumph surge through me. Kyle stood there, fists clenched, incredulous as the crowd erupted around me, lifting me on their shoulders in celebration. As Kyle stalked back to his truck, furious and humiliated, I relished the sweet taste of victory. He had been stripped of his arrogance, exposed for the inconsiderate neighbor he was, and I had reclaimed my dignity in the process. From that day forward, the dynamic in our neighborhood shifted. I wasn't just the nice neighbor anymore, I was a formidable presence. Kyle, on the other hand, became the cautionary tale, the neighbor who let his ego get the best of him. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for myself, reclaiming my space, and reminding everyone around me that sometimes, as the echoes of cheers still vibrated in the air, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was no longer just Joanna, I was a phoenix rising from the ashes of my previous frustrations, and the climax of my revenge was finally unfolding before my eyes. The moment Kyle realized he had lost, not just the competition, but the respect of our neighbors, was etched into my memory. His face contorted into an expression of rage and disbelief, a mix of embarrassment and indignation that felt like sweet justice. "You think this is funny, Joanna?" He spat, the words dripping with venom as he stormed back to his truck. But I wasn't going to let him retreat in anger. I needed to confront him, to let him know that I stood unwavering in my victory. I collected my thoughts, took a deep breath, and approached his truck, the very embodiment of confidence. The crowd, sensing the tension, hushed, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. "Listen, Kyle," I said, my voice steady and assertive, "I'm glad we could finally settle this. Maybe now you'll think twice before you park next to my car without regard for my space. This isn't just about parking, it's about respect." His anger sparked as he glared at me, yet a part of him seemed to recognize the truth in my words. "Respect? Are you kidding me?" He scoffed, crossing his arms. "You've just made a fool out of me in front of everyone." I forced a smile, relishing the poetic nature of his predicament. "No, you did that all on your own, Kyle. Maybe if you spent less time flaunting your truck and more time respecting your neighbors, this wouldn't have happened." In that moment, I could see a shift in the crowd's energy. They were no longer mere spectators to an amusing contest, they were witnesses to a transformative moment. I could almost hear their silent cheers, a collective acknowledgement that I had stood my ground and come out on top. Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a brief second, I thought he might lash out physically. But instead, he sighed, the fight visibly leaving him. "Whatever, Joanna. You won this round. Just don't think I'll give up that easily." He climbed into his truck, slamming the door behind him, and the sound reverberated through the neighborhood as he cranked the engine. But I was ready for him. I had anticipated his exit, and just as he backed out, I raised my handmade trophy high above my head. "Don't forget, Kyle. I'll be waiting for a rematch. And next time, maybe try parking a little less like a jerk." The crowd burst into laughter and applause, a triumphant roar that shook the very air around us. Kyle's face flushed with fury, but I could see he was outnumbered. He accelerated down the street, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving behind a flurry of dust and a community that had finally taken a stand against his arrogance. As the dust settled, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over me: elation, relief, triumph. My heart swelled with pride as my neighbors began to gather around, clapping me on the back and congratulating me. "You really showed him, Joanna," a woman exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. The crowd rallied around me, celebrating not just my victory, but the empowerment I had ignited within them. In that moment, I felt like a champion, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever felt trampled by a bully. This victory resonated deeper than any petty revenge. It was a clarion call for respect, boundaries, and community. I lifted the trophy high once more, basking in the glow of approval and laughter. "Next time, we'll have even more challenges," I declared, the crowd cheering in response. "Who wants to join me for an obstacle course? We'll show Kyle that size doesn't matter when it comes to fun." As the cheers rang out, I felt a sense of kinship with my neighbors. We were all in this together, united by the common thread of standing up for what was right. I knew this day would be remembered as a turning point, for not just me, but for everyone who had grown tired of Kyle's antics. In that climactic moment, I learned that true courage comes not from seeking revenge but from finding strength in standing up for yourself and your community. The thrill of triumph filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had reclaimed my place in this neighborhood not just as a neighbor, but as a force of change. And as the sun set behind us, casting golden rays over our little gathering, I realized that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where kindness and respect reigned supreme, and where I would continue to fight for what mattered, one day at a time. The days that followed the suburban showdown, Park Wars edition, were nothing short of surreal. I felt like I was walking on air, buoyed by the euphoria of the victory. But as with any battle, the aftermath wasn't without its consequences, and I was about to learn that the thrill of triumph can be accompanied by its own set of complexities. After that unforgettable day, Kyle seemed to retreat into his shell, sulking beneath the veneer of his truck like a wounded animal. The once boisterous engine roars and obnoxious bass beats that echoed through our neighborhood faded. It was almost eerie, a void left in his absence. My initial sense of victory began to shift into something more contemplative. Had I pushed him too far? Had I crossed a line that might have repercussions beyond just parking disputes? As the weeks went by, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who were now rallying around me, not just because I had stood up to Kyle, but because I had ignited a spirit of camaraderie in our neighborhood that had long been dormant. Potluck dinners sprung up, and the sense of community seemed to flourish like never before. For every handshake and supportive message I received, however, there was a lingering shadow of doubt that crept in. One evening, as I sat on my front porch sipping iced tea and enjoying the summer breeze, I caught a glimpse of Kyle. He was sitting in his garage, staring at his truck with that same defeated expression that had marred his face after the competition. I felt an impulse to confront him, to approach him and offer peace. But would that undermine my small victory? Would it show weakness? I hesitated, the conflict raging in my mind. A few days later, our community organized a cleanup effort at the local park, and I couldn't resist getting involved. As I gathered with neighbors to pick up trash and paint benches, I noticed Kyle's father, Mr. Davis, attending the event. He was a kind man, always waving hello and sharing stories about his grandchildren. I approached him, and as we chatted, I learned that Kyle had been struggling with some personal issues, including a recent breakup and work stress. It shed a new light on his erratic behavior. I realized he wasn't just a bully but perhaps a man who was battling his own demons. Feeling a flicker of compassion, I decided to take action, something that surprised even me. The following week, I baked a batch of cookies, an olive branch if you will, and walked over to Kyle's house. I hesitated at his front door, nervously fiddling with the plate of cookies as I contemplated the potential outcome. When Kyle opened the door, his expression was one of shock, not rage. I could see the weariness etched on his face, the remnants of the bravado that had once defined him now stripped bare. "What do you want, Joanna?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things escalated," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I think we both got a bit carried away. I know we can have our differences, but I'd rather not stay in an endless battle with you." He blinked at me, seemingly caught off guard. "Are you serious?" he retorted, skepticism hanging in the air. "You're not mad about the cookies being carbs?" I chuckled, the tension slowly dissipating. "No, I'm just hoping we can start fresh. Maybe work together on keeping our neighborhood great instead of fighting over parking spaces." For the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, and it felt like a breakthrough. He sighed, the walls around him crumbling just a bit. "I guess I've been an ass. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I'm just trying to figure some things out in my life, and I took it out on you." At that moment, I felt a rush of empathy for him. We were both flawed humans stumbling through life in search of respect and belonging. The lines of rivalry blurred, and instead of reveling in my triumph, I felt a sense of shared humanity. Kyle took the plate of cookies with a hesitant smile, and as I turned to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe in seeking revenge and reclaiming my space, I had also unwittingly opened a door to understanding. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between us began to shift. Kyle joined our community cleanup efforts, and as I worked alongside him, we found ourselves engaged in light banter rather than petty arguments. It became clear that beneath the bravado, he was just a guy trying to navigate a challenging chapter in his life, one that bore resemblance to my own struggles. Eventually, through mutual respect and camaraderie, the rift began to close, and our neighborhood began healing from the wounds of rivalry. Our once silent conversations slowly morphed into sincere exchanges about work and life, and, surprisingly, I found myself enjoying his company. It was a strange turn of events, and by the time summer rolled into fall, a semblance of friendship emerged from the ashes of animosity. I even found the courage to invite him to our next neighborhood potluck, and to my surprise, he showed up with a homemade dish, an attempt to contribute that spoke volumes of his own growth. As I look back at the tumultuous journey from that initial parking dispute to the camaraderie we now shared, I realized that sometimes revenge isn't the answer. The victory I had sought in standing up against Kyle had morphed into something greater, a deeper understanding of not just my own motivations, but of another person's struggles. In the end, the lesson was profound: revenge may provide a fleeting thrill, but empathy and respect have the power to heal and transform relationships. Life is too short to remain tethered to grudges. The real victory lies in forging connections where animosity once reigned. And so, as I sat with my neighbors laughing and sharing stories while the leaves began to turn golden, I couldn't help but smile. I had learned that in seeking to reclaim my place, I had inadvertently built a community, a place where kindness, respect, and understanding could flourish, even amidst the most unexpected of rivalries. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voices that echo the longest, it's the quiet gestures of understanding that truly resonate. In the drama of life, the greatest plot twists often come not from vengeance, but from the courage to extend a hand instead of a fist. And that, I knew, would forever shape the narrative of our little suburban neighborhood. Who would have thought? I'm used to myself, laughter echoing in the background. All it took was a parking feud to find our way back to each other.
It's funny how seemingly small annoyances can pile up into a towering mountain of resentment. I never wanted to become that person, the bitter neighbor who nurses grudges like a pet. But here we are. I can still picture the moment it all began, that fateful evening when Lucas, my charming but infuriating neighbor, decided that my driveway was his personal parking lot. It was one of those scorching summer days when the sun seemed to hang heavy in the sky, baking our suburban neighborhood into a sleepy haze. I could smell the grass being freshly mowed, its sharp, earthy scent mingling with the sweet aroma of my homemade lemonade. I had just stepped out onto my porch, ready to unwind with a good book, when I spotted Lucas's sleek black sedan blocking my way again. The absurdity of it made my blood boil. He had already played this game too many times. Lucas is that kind of guy, the one who flashes a disarming smile and has a way of making even the most mundane conversation feel like a special encounter. He's charming and handsome, with tousled hair that catches the light just right, making it hard to dislike him. But underneath that easygoing demeanor lurks a selfishness that grates on my last nerve. I could hear him laughing with someone inside his car, his latest Tinder match, no doubt. The laughter floated like delicate bubbles through the air, infuriatingly carefree. I couldn't see her, but I pictured a young woman, wide-eyed and excited, her heart fluttering at the prospect of a perfect first date. Meanwhile, here I stood, my plans for a peaceful evening shattered by his thoughtlessness. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over my neighborhood, a stark contrast to the darkening storm brewing within me. I felt the familiar fire of anger ignite, hot and unyielding, as I paced in front of the blockade that had become a familiar fixture in my life. It's funny, really, how something as trivial as a blocked driveway could turn into a festering wound, one that I had tried to ignore for far too long. But tonight would be different. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh-cut grass somehow mixing with the smoldering ember of my simmering rage. This was the moment when the scales tipped. I could feel it in my bones. Tonight, I would take action. Maybe it was the heat, or perhaps the weight of all those unresolved frustrations that pushed me over the edge, but one thought echoed in my mind with relentless clarity. He had made a choice, one too many times, and now it was my turn to remind him that his actions had consequences. As I slipped my phone from my pocket, a chill ran down my spine, an omen of what was to come. Little did I know, this would become a twisted tale that would forever change the dynamic of our little cul-de-sac. A date might have been on the line, but revenge was not far behind. As I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, I thought. People make mistakes. But deep down, I knew this was far from a simple mistake. This was a pattern, an ongoing narrative of disrespect. Lucas didn't just block my driveway, he dismissed my space, my time, my very existence. Each time he parked in front of my house, it felt like a symbolic declaration, your needs don't matter. I clenched my fists, feeling the tension in my muscles as I imagined how many times I'd allowed his selfishness to slide by. The first time he parked there, I shrugged it off, I didn't want to rock the boat. I chalked it up to him having a rough day. The second time, I knocked on his door, and he smiled, apologizing profusely, stating it wouldn't happen again. I wanted to believe him. But the third, fourth, and fifth times, the pattern became painfully clear. Each apology was as empty as the promises he made. And now, as I watched him through his tinted windows, chuckling with his date, I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me. I had seen my own reflection in his casual disregard, and it sickened me. How can he laugh while I'm stuck here fuming? I thought. My mind raced back to my own attempts at connecting with others, how I had once tried a dating app, only to be ghosted or treated like an afterthought. This was a man who could effortlessly charm anyone, all while treating me like a doormat. Is this really the kind of neighbor I want to be? I grappled with the question, a gnawing sense of sadness creeping in. I had preferred to be the calm, understanding neighbor, but he had turned me into a simmering cauldron of resentment. Each laugh I heard from his car felt like a personal slap in the face. The more I thought about it, the more I began to view our interactions as a twisted game, a game I had been losing. The sadness morphed into a searing anger, filling my veins like molten lava. It was no longer just about a blocked driveway, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Why should I let him have the upper hand? I thought, even as a part of me wanted to resist this dark urge. I could feel the urge for revenge crawling up my spine, a whispering seduction. It was intoxicating, powerful, a way to wrestle back control over my own life. Just one more time, I told myself, staring at the sleek black car, an extension of his entitlement. One more time, and he'll understand the consequences of his actions. I felt a wicked thrill at the thought, an idea that had been festering under the surface for far too long. The image of him stepping out of his date and discovering his car absent sent a shiver of excitement through me. Was I really going to do this? A part of me tried to step back, to reason with the voice that whispered sweetly of revenge, but the anger had taken root. I imagined Lucas's face, a mixture of confusion and disbelief, replaced by embarrassment as he scoured the streets for his beloved sedan. It was petty, yes, but it felt justified, an equalizer in a world that seemed eager to trivialize my needs. My heart raced as I scrolled through the contacts on my phone, searching for the number of the towing company I had used in the past. I could almost hear the gears of fate grinding as the weight of my decision sank in. The phone felt heavy in my hand, each digit a step deeper into this dark rabbit hole I was willingly plunging into. As I dialed the number, a giddy mix of adrenaline and dread coursed through me. "Hi there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as the operator answered. "I need to report a vehicle blocking my driveway." Each word felt like a confession, a step further away from the person I thought I was. I provided the details, Lucas's car, the make and model, the location, and with every minute I spent on the call, I felt my resolve hardening. I was finally taking control. But just as my heart began to swell with a morbid sense of satisfaction, it all came crashing down. The operator informed me that they would dispatch a tow truck immediately. I hung up, my hands shaking slightly as I turned to stare at Lucas's car once more. The laughter inside the vehicle had risen, filling the warm evening air with an almost mocking tone. I could almost envision his date, her laughter washing away any worries she might have had, unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. What if they came outside and I was caught? The thought sent an icy wave of apprehension through me. I tried to shake it off, to reassure myself that it was too late to back down now. But as I stood there, a witness to their carefree banter, the joy I had briefly felt about my petty vendetta began to dissolve into something darker. Suddenly, I was struck by an overwhelming wave of humiliating doubt. I had grown up striving to be better than the people who let their tempers dictate their actions, those who reveled in drama and chaos. Had I really lowered myself to this level? I fought back against the inner voice that scolded me, but the tension was building, like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Minutes passed like hours as I waited, a prisoner to my own impulses. I paced back and forth, nerves fraying at the edges. The laughter inside the car had dulled to a soft murmur, punctuated by the occasional burst of excitement from his date. With each passing moment, I felt more isolated, trapped in my own feelings of resentment and regret. How did it come to this? Then, the unmistakable sound of a tow truck rumbling down the street sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I held my breath, watching as the truck pulled up in front of my house. The driver emerged, a burly man with tattoos sprawling down his arms, his demeanor all business. In that moment, I could hardly believe it was happening. My heart raced, a symphony of fear and exhilaration as I realized that there was no going back now. As the driver approached the parked car, I felt a sickening mix of anticipation and dread. What would Lucas say when he finally noticed? Would he accuse me? Would his date laugh, or would she be horrified? I peered through the darkened windows of his car, straining to see their reaction. Would they hear the commotion outside? And then, in an abrupt moment of cosmic irony, I witnessed the complete unraveling of the evening. Lucas's date opened the door to step outside, mischief glinting in her eye as she said something teasing that made him chuckle. But as soon as they both glanced toward the street, their laughter fell away. Lucas's expression morphed from delight to confusion and horror, his jovial demeanor evaporating like dew in the morning sun. In that second, as the realization washed over his face, I felt an intoxicating surge of power. It was a feeling I hadn't anticipated, a rush that sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't just redirected my frustration, I had taken the reins of my narrative and spun it into something undeniably satisfying. Lucas's laughter faltered, his smile fading as he stepped forward, the casual confidence he wore like a mantle slipping away. I could see the moment he registered what was happening. His eyes widened, darting from the tow truck to his beloved black sedan, and the mirth that once danced across his features was replaced by confusion and disbelief. It was beautiful, an unfiltered reflection of the chaos I'd spent months curating, and I stood frozen, a spectator to my own masterpiece. Wait, what? He began, his voice rising, frantic. His date, a striking blonde with sparkling eyes, followed his gaze, a mix of confusion and concern crinkling her brow. I was captivated by the dynamic, a perfect embodiment of my earlier insecurities. His charm, his easy laughter, all of it had built up a facade, and now it was cracking in real time. The driver of the tow truck approached Lucas with an air of nonchalance, clipboard in hand, as if they were simply discussing the weather instead of about to haul away his prized possession. "You can't park here, buddy. Blocking someone's driveway is a big no-no," he stated matter-of-factly, his voice gruff but not unkind. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implications, and I felt a savage thrill at the sight of my neighbor's veneer of confidence crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. Lucas stammered, I didn't think," but his protest fell flat. The words felt empty, hollowed out by the reality that he had consistently ignored the needs of those around him, including mine. It was poetic in a way. He had built his world around the idea that he could do as he pleased, but now he was about to experience the consequences of his choices. I could hear the muffled laughter from inside the tow truck as the driver pointed to the sign at the end of my driveway, clearly stating the no parking rules. Each word felt like a hammer hitting a nail deeper into the coffin of Lucas's bravado. I wanted to scream with glee, to burst into applause at the poetic justice unfolding before me, but I knew I had to remain in the shadows, a silent puppeteer pulling the strings of this elaborate setup. Meanwhile, his date stood beside him, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she realized what was happening. "Lucas, is this your car?" She looked back and forth between him and the truck, bewildered. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of guilt for her, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of self-satisfaction. He deserved this, he had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. "I can't believe this," Lucas exclaimed, throwing his hands up in exasperation, a sharp edge in his voice that only served to escalate the situation. I could almost feel the heat radiating off his skin, the embarrassment mixing with indignation. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. My heart raced as I focused on their interaction, the emotional stakes rising higher with each passing moment. Lucas was no stranger to confrontation, but this was a reckoning he hadn't prepared for. His confidence was with adrenaline surging through my veins. I began to formulate what I believed would be a masterstroke in this game of neighborly revenge. I needed a plan that would not only serve as payback but also ensure that Lucas got the message loud and clear. Here's how I decided to execute my wickedly clever plot step by step. Before going all in on my revenge, I needed to assess the situation further. I knew that Lucas had a pretty routine lifestyle, but I needed to fine-tune the details. I made it a point to pay attention to his schedule over the next few days. When did he usually go on dates? What time did he leave for work? I even sat on my porch, feigning casual interest while taking note of when he parked and, more importantly, when he didn't. I worried he might catch on to my observations, but I convinced myself that being discreet would be easy. Just act natural, right? I learned Lucas typically had Tinder dates on Friday evenings, often just as the sun began to set. This was my window of opportunity. I decided to pick a particular Friday, one when I sensed he had a date scheduled. I made sure to confirm that the driveway was blocked. After all, that was the crux of my plan. Once I had a target date, I reached out to the towing company again, this time under the guise of a neighborly concern. "Hey, I noticed a vehicle has been frequently blocking the driveway right across from mine. I'd hate for something unfortunate to happen to it, you know. If it could be towed when it's blocking the drive, I'd be so thankful." I feigned innocence, ensuring they'd be available on that particular Friday evening. I was deeply entangled in this web of deceit, and the weight of the lie felt like a boulder on my chest. What if the towing company didn't come through? What if they got lost or decided to bail? I had to keep my cool and trust the plan. On the evening of the date, I needed to create the perfect diversion to ensure Lucas would park in his usual spot. I decided to host a barbecue on my front lawn, inviting a few of the neighbors over for some casual fun. I knew Lucas often had a habit of joining in whenever there was a gathering, thinking he could charm everyone with his stories. I scheduled everything to start around 6 p.m. I strategically set up the barbecue so that it would literally block his view of my driveway. The smoke, the laughter, the sounds of sizzling burgers, it would all be an alluring call to him, begging him to join in the fray and, more importantly, park his car right where I wanted him. I waited, heart racing, as my fellow neighbors mingled and enjoyed the food. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I spotted Lucas's car turning onto our street, just as I had predicted. My heart did a little dance of glee as he parked right in front of my driveway, unaware of the impending chaos about to unfold. At this point, I felt the familiar pang of doubt creeping in. What if things didn't go according to plan? What if he didn't block the driveway enough? I had to keep my composure, reminding myself that it was all coming together. Step 6, the moment arrived like a thunderclap. As Lucas stepped out of his sleek black sedan, he wore that same confident grin he used to charm everyone around him. But tonight, that smile would soon be stripped away, along with any dignity he clung to. My heart raced, pounding in syncopation with the simmering tension that hung thick in the humid evening air. He glanced towards my barbecue gathering, where laughter and chatter bounced like balloons, filling the air with an unmistakable sense of festivity. I could hardly hold back a smirk as I pretended to toss a burger on the grill, my eyes slyly watching him through the smoke. The scent of grilled meat mingled with the steady thrum of my pulse, it was intoxicating. His date emerged next, a vision of excitement as she twirled in her dress, her laughter ringing out like chimes. She was completely oblivious to the impending train wreck about to unfold. I could feel a sense of poetic justice sinking in, a perfect storm brewing right before my eyes. As Lucas approached, I caught the initial glimmer of confusion in his eyes as they landed on my driveway. The laughter faded into a controlled silence, replaced by the soft crackling of the barbecue. I could sense the shift in the air as he started to piece it together. Wait, is this? He turned back to his date, who looked just as puzzled, her eyebrows knitting together in concern. In that moment, dread washed over his features like ice water cascading down his spine. The laughter from the party around me felt like a cruel mockery of his unraveling confidence. My heart danced with glee, there was something so satisfying about his slow realization, he was trapped in his own self-inflicted dilemma. Just as he began to close the distance between us, the low rumble of the tow truck echoed down the street, a harbinger of chaos. I could see his eyes widen, pupils dilating as disbelief washed over him. He turned, seeking the source of the sound, and there it was, the very sign of his impending embarrassment trundling toward him. The driver of the tow truck hopped out, clipboard in hand, with a swagger that only added to the theatricality of the moment. "Sorry, buddy. This vehicle's blocking the driveway. Can't have that." His tone was devoid of sympathy, a perfect counterpoint to Lucas's disbelief. "No. Wait," shouted Lucas, his voice rising in desperation as he sprinted toward the truck. His charming veneer had shattered, and all that remained was a frantic man scrambling to salvage whatever he could. The panic in his voice sent a shiver of exhilaration through me. Finally, he was experiencing the chaos I had endured for far too long. With all due respect, the driver began, his brow furrowed as he gestured at the clearly posted no parking signs. "You can't park here, man. This driveway's off limits." The driver's face was a mask of indifference, and I could feel the thrill of justice course through me like a jolt of electricity. Lucas tried to explain, but his words were just an incoherent jumble of frustration and embarrassment. "I didn't, this is my car." I was just, but his voice had dwindled, overtaken by the roar of the engine and the mounting laughter echoing from my barbecue. Each ounce of amusement from my neighbors felt like a knife twisting into him, and it was glorious. His date stood frozen, mouth agape, unable to comprehend the scene unfurling before her eyes. I could almost see the thoughts racing. The chaos of Lucas's embarrassment reverberated through the evening air like a haunting melody, a satisfying echo of justice that rang true in my ears. As the tow truck driver maneuvered the vehicle onto the flatbed, I couldn't help but feel a bittersweet twinge of remorse mixed with the elation of having taken control. Lucas's world was crumbling in front of me, the charade of charm and confidence he had built now reduced to a fragile facade. His date, who had seemed so thrilled moments earlier to be out with him, now stood in stunned silence, her excitement evaporating like vapor in the crisp night air. I caught the flicker of confusion in her eyes, her expression morphing from amusement to pity as she processed the scene unfolding before her. The reality of the situation was a stark contrast to the romantic narrative she'd likely envisioned for their evening. It was a cruel twist of fate, and for a brief moment, I felt a flash of compassion for her. But it was quickly overshadowed by the satisfaction of witnessing Lucas's public humiliation. As the truck drove away with his beloved black sedan in tow, Lucas turned back toward me, his expression shifting from anger to incredulity, a whirlwind of emotions flooding his features. "Did you do this?" he shouted, his voice a mix of rage and desperation. The words hung in the air, sharp and accusing, as my neighbors all turned to look at the unfolding drama, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and intrigue. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lucas," I replied, feigning innocence, the corners of my mouth twitching into a barely contained smile. "Maybe if you hadn't blocked my driveway, this wouldn't have happened." The satisfaction of delivering that line washed over me like a soothing balm, a damning reminder of the many times he had dismissed my boundaries. The laughter of my neighbors mingled with Lucas's furious sputtering, creating a cacophony of joy that filled the night. It was a moment of poetic justice, a culmination of months of pent-up frustration released in a single instance of vulnerability. As his embarrassment painted his cheeks a fiery shade of crimson, I knew I had won this battle. But with each passing second, the thrill of my revenge began to dull, replaced by an unsettling pang of guilt. Watching Lucas's humiliation unfold had felt exhilarating, but the aftermath was far murkier. I had become the very person I had never intended to be, the villain in someone else's story. I had taken pleasure in his pain, and it hung over me like a dark cloud. In the days that followed, I witnessed the consequences of my actions reverberate through our small community. Lucas became a shell of his former self, a man stripped of the confidence that had once radiated from him like a beacon. He retreated into his home, offering only curt nods to those who dared to engage with him. The laughter that had once filled my evenings with warmth was replaced by an awkward tension, a silent acknowledgement of the incident that had become the talk of the neighborhood. As the weeks wore on, I caught glimpses of him through the curtains of his house, moments where he sat alone in the dim light, a distant figure framed by shadows. I felt a pang of guilt gnawing at me. The weight of my revenge settled heavily on my shoulders, a bitter reminder that the thrill I had chased was now a source of regret. I had wanted to teach him a lesson, but in the process, I had stripped him of the very essence that had made him human. The social consequences began to ripple outward like,
Hey everyone, my name is Joanna, and I'm sitting down to share something that's been festering inside me for far too long. I'm not proud of what I'm plotting, but sometimes life pushes you to your limits, and all you can think about is how to fight back. If you've ever experienced a neighbor crossing the line, then you'll understand where I'm coming from. Let me paint you a picture of my world. I live in a cozy little 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked away in a small town known for its friendly atmosphere. Except, the past few years have felt anything but friendly thanks to my next-door neighbor, Mark. Mark is one of those people who loves to flaunt his privilege, always strutting around like he owns the place, because, in his mind, he practically does. He's got this enormous lawn which, I'll admit, is beautifully maintained, but it's not just the grass that's been getting under my skin. It's the incessant noise, his loud parties that go on until the early morning, blaring music so obnoxiously it feels like I'm living in a club instead of a suburb. And then there's his attitude. He's got an ego the size of a house and a knack for belittling those around him. I remember the time he scoffed at my garden, calling my flowers weeds and suggesting I stick to low-maintenance plants. It was a small comment, but it stuck with me, as if he were trying to diminish my entire being. I took pride in those flowers, and suddenly they felt like a symbol of my failures in his eyes. It wasn't just his parties or his hurtful comments. It was the arrogance in how he dealt with people that really grated on me. He once threatened to call the HOA on my son's basketball hoop, claiming it was an eyesore. Never mind that the kids in the neighborhood loved playing with it. Mark didn't just want to be the king of his castle, he wanted to reign over mine, too. I tried being the better person. I had coffee with him on occasion, tried to build a rapport, but every time we interacted, I felt like I was just feeding his ego. He brushed off my concerns and laughed at my attempts to be friendly. That's when I realized, no amount of kindness would ever reach him. So here I am, in this self-imposed exile of anger and resentment, concocting a plan to inconvenience him just enough to knock him off his pedestal. I know revenge isn't the answer, but in my heart, it feels like the only way to reclaim my sense of peace in a neighborhood that's become a battleground. And thus begins my journey, a quest not for destruction, but for some small measure of justice. I'm reaching out to all of you, hoping to channel my frustration into something creative, clever, and maybe even a little fun. Welcome to my world of quiet rebellion, where I'm about to make Mark regret ever crossing paths with me. The tipping point came last summer, a scorching afternoon when the entire neighborhood was parched and on edge. I had just finished mowing my lawn, beads of sweat lining my forehead, when I heard muffled laughter and music drifting from Mark's backyard. I was annoyed, but I tried to shake it off. After all, summer was for gatherings, right? But this wasn't just a small gathering, it was an all-out bash. I tried to focus on the flower beds, pruning and pulling weeds, but the music only grew louder, accompanied by the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. An hour into their revelry, my son Jake came outside, frustrated and red-faced. "Mom, I can't hear myself think. Can we go to the park or something?" That was my breaking point. It wasn't just the noise, it was the blatant disregard for the rest of us living on this street. I looked over the fence and saw Mark lounging in his inflatable pool, a smug smile plastered on his face, orchestrating his guests as if he were a celebrity at a private event. My heart sank. This was the man who had the audacity to call my flowers weeds, and now he was putting my family's comfort on the back burner for his self-indulgence. The evening dragged on, and after nearly 3 hours of chaos, I finally snapped. I stormed over to his yard, my heart pounding and my fists clenched at my sides. I could feel the stares of guests as I approached, but I didn't care. I demanded he turn down the music. To my utter disbelief, he laughed in my face, an obnoxious, mocking sound. "Lighten up, Joanna. It's just a party. If you can't handle it, maybe you should invest in some earplugs." My cheeks burned with humiliation. I turned on my heel and walked away, anger bubbling inside me like a simmering pot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was powerless while he reveled in his self-made kingdom. The next day, I discovered that my 15-year-old son had been bullied at school for being the kid whose mom can't even get her neighbor to turn down his music. That was when Mark crossed the line. He hadn't just trampled my peace, he had affected my child. I called my husband, crying, my voice trembling as I recounted the events. His response was to let it go, to rise above it and take the high road. But how could I, when Mark had turned my home, a place of solace, into a source of anxiety and humiliation? Days turned into weeks of simmering resentment. Each time I saw Mark in his backyard, basking in the sun, a knot twisted tighter in my stomach. Every time I heard laughter echoing between the fences, it was a reminder that I was stuck in a one-sided war. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. But in that darkness, something started to shift within me. I began to fantasize about little inconveniences, small annoyances that would disrupt his precious routine. The thought of him feeling the way I had felt that day became intoxicating. Each idea felt like a spark igniting a fire, my rage morphing into a strategy. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be disrespected, to lose a little bit of that smug smile, a chance for him to taste the bitterness of his own arrogance. As the summer heat persisted, I started to plan. It was time for Mark to realize that he wasn't untouchable, that his reign over the neighborhood wasn't as absolute as he believed. I would no longer be the silent neighbor next door. The games had begun, and I was ready to play mine. I needed help, though, ideas that could make my plans not only effective but also deliciously entertaining. And so, here I am, pouring out my heart to you all, hoping together we can craft the perfect, harmless revenge. Because sometimes, the most satisfying victories come not from grand gestures but from subtly orchestrated inconveniences that remind the arrogant of their humanity. The first week of my plotting felt like a pressure cooker simmering just below a bubble, but soon, the heat intensified. I decided to start small, a few harmless pranks that would send a subtle message. With the help of some online forums, I gathered ideas, annoying yet lighthearted tactics that could disrupt Mark's routine without crossing any lines. I mean, who wouldn't want to mess with a lawn that was so proud and ostentatious? I took to the local hardware store, purchasing some fake for sale signs that I could accidentally stick in his yard during one of his loud parties. I convinced myself it was harmless, a way to poke fun at his inflated sense of self-importance. It felt good to laugh about it, to think about how it would make him squirm. But what began as innocent mischief quickly spiraled into something more sinister. One night as I was preparing for bed, I heard Mark's party kick off again. The volume was unbearable, the vibrations creeping through my walls as if the bass was in my very bones. I snapped. I started pacing, a whirlwind of frustration swirling around me. In that moment, my innocent pranks transformed into a fury I hadn't anticipated. I stepped outside, my heart racing, and began to fill a bucket with ice water, ready to spill it over the fence just to see the shock on his face. I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? But then I thought about my son, about the way Mark had ridiculed him. In my mind, it felt justified, until I spilled the water, not over Mark, but onto my patio. It hit the wooden boards with a loud thud, echoing back my failure. It was that very evening that I made my first real move. I found an anonymous number and sent a complaint to the HOA about the noise, listing the violation of local noise ordinances. The thrill of that small act was intoxicating. I felt like I was finally taking control, but it also stirred something deeper inside me, a taste for vindication that I hadn't expected. But then, the retaliation came. Just 2 days later, Mark confronted me while I was gardening, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a storm brewing in his eyes. "Joanna, I know it was you. You had to stoop low enough to drag the HOA into this?" His voice dripped with condescension, the smug smile replaced by anger. "You could have just talked to me like an adult. But I guess that's too much to expect from a woman like you." Each word cut into me like a jagged knife. I thought I was getting even, but instead, I had opened myself up to his disdain. I felt like a coward and a fool, standing there with my gardening gloves on, vulnerable under the weight of his contempt. I tried to defend myself, but my voice wavered, and the self-assuredness I had mustered crumbled under his glare. That was when I noticed the other neighbors peeking from behind their curtains, their eyes wide, whispering among themselves. I was suddenly the subject of their scrutiny, a neighbor who had gone too far in seeking revenge. Mark had turned my innocuous attempts into a spectacle, and I was the one left humiliated. After that confrontation, I no longer felt like I was wielding the power. Instead, I felt exposed, as if I was holding a loaded weapon with the safety off. It wasn't long before Mark retaliated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every morning, just as the sun peeked over the horizon, he would start his yard work, mowing the lawn or power washing his driveway with the volume cranked up to 11. I would scramble to close the windows, desperate to drown out the din, but it was futile. It felt like he was out to make my life hell, determined to show me who was boss. Then, I found out he had convinced our neighborhood association to ban my son's basketball hoop entirely. They claimed it was a safety hazard, but I knew it was Mark pulling strings behind the scenes. When my son came home with the news, utterly crushed, I felt a surge of anger that blotted out everything else. I called my husband again, this time in a frenzy, demanding he do something to support our family against Mark's unreasonable actions. His response was still the same: "Just ignore him, Joanna. Don't let him get under your skin." But how could I? The pressure was building, and my efforts to reclaim my space were morphing into a war I never intended to wage. As summer wore on, the situation grew more volatile. My pranks became bolder, more elaborate as I searched for ways to undermine Mark without getting my hands dirty. I had arranged to have a dozen inflatable flamingos delivered to his yard during one of his notorious soirees. I could hardly contain my laughter as I imagined him stepping outside to find a lawn full of bright pink nuisances. But every action had consequences. Mark retaliated by putting up a wooden privacy fence, towering over the existing one, blocking out sunlight from my little garden. And with that, any remnant of peace I had left began to evaporate. In my heart, I still believed I was fighting for the neighborhood against arrogance, yet with every prank that backfired, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. The spiral continued, each act of revenge fueling another wave of retaliation, and soon I realized I was trapped in a cycle of escalation that was consuming my peace and sense of self. What had begun as a simple desire for justice had now turned into a toxic dance of vengeance. I needed help more than ever, not just in plotting more inconveniences, but in finding a way to reclaim my dignity without losing myself in the process. With every passing day, my anger transformed, and I had to face the truth: I was becoming just as arrogant as Mark. It was time to decide whether I wanted to rise above it or continue down this dark path of revenge. I needed to break the cycle, but how? It was a sweltering August afternoon, and I found myself staring at the blank wall of my bedroom, the sunlight filtering in through the curtains creating patterns on the floor. My head spun with thoughts of revenge, each idea more ludicrous than the last. I could feel the bitterness in my stomach, an unsettling mixture of anger and sorrow swirling within me. I was exhausted, physically from the petty clashes with Mark and emotionally from the guilt creeping in. That day, I had just finished an exhausting 3-hour battle against my inner turmoil. I had spent the morning dissecting my latest prank, filling his lawn with hundreds of plastic flamingos. I had imagined his face contorting in disbelief, perhaps even the hint of a smirk crossing my lips as I envisioned the chaos it would unleash. But the moment I started to gather supplies, a deep, gnawing feeling settled in my gut. Was I really going to stoop to his level? As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed insistently next to me. It was Jake, sending me a photo of his latest game, a snapshot of him and his friends at the park, all laughing, all free from the chaos that had engulfed our home. The contrast between my son's carefree smile and the heaviness in my heart struck me. I had been so preoccupied with my own bitterness that I had forgotten what this was truly about: my family, my peace, my son's happiness. In that moment, clarity washed over me like a cool breeze. I realized that I had been consumed by a cycle of petty revenge that was damaging not only my relationship with Mark but also my own inner peace and my family's happiness. I had allowed this neighbor to become the architect of my misery, and in turn, I had become the architect of my own discontent. It was a revelation that shook me to my core. I couldn't keep going down this path. This wasn't me, this wasn't the Joanna I wanted to be. In my quest for justice, I was losing sight of who I was as a person. I didn't want to be that neighbor, the one recognized for pettiness and spite. I wanted to be the person who could rise above it all, who could handle conflict with grace, even in the face of Mark's arrogance. But how? The question lingered, echoing in my mind. I needed to find a way to stand up for myself without resorting to childish antics or going to war. It was time to reclaim my power, not through revenge but through assertiveness. I began to formulate a new plan, one focused on communication rather than conflict. What if I directly confronted Mark, not with anger but with clarity? I needed to show him the impact of his actions, not just on me but on our entire neighborhood. I wanted him to understand that he wasn't just affecting me, but the community we both lived in. That evening, I walked outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and as I approached the fence that separated our yards, I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about restoring balance. When I saw Mark outside, tending to his infamous lawn, I felt my heart race. I approached him, my hands trembling slightly, but I pressed on. "Mark, can we talk?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face before settling into that familiar smirk. "What's the matter, Joanna? Had enough of your little pranks?" My heart sank for a moment, but I pushed through. "No, actually. I wanted to discuss how we can coexist better. I feel like our recent conflicts have escalated, and it's affecting not just us, but everyone around us." To my astonishment, the smirk faded. I could see a hint of uncertainty in his eyes as if he wasn't expecting this approach. It was a glimmer of hope. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shot back, but there was a hesitance in his tone. I pressed on, speaking with conviction. "Your parties have been loud enough to disrupt my family's peace, and you've made hurtful comments that have affected my son. I want to find a way to communicate openly instead of resorting to pranks or complaints. Can we work on this?" Mark shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment, I thought he would dismiss me entirely. But instead, he sighed, the weight of our unspoken tension hanging between us. "Fine. But you need to learn to lighten up. I'm not here to hold your hand." I felt a flicker of victory in that moment. We hadn't resolved anything yet, but the door had been opened. I was no longer the faceless neighbor next door. I was Joanna, a person willing to confront the chaos instead of hiding behind petty revenge. It was then that I understood, my journey wasn't just about inconveniencing Mark. It was about reclaiming my dignity, rebuilding my strength, and finding my voice in a neighborhood that had become a battleground. That day marked the turning point in my story, a moment where I chose growth over bitterness, where I decided that the best way to disrupt Mark's reign wasn't through revenge but through genuine communication. And while I still felt the echoes of anger and resentment, I now had the tools to conquer them, not by fighting fire with fire, but by building bridges instead of walls. From that moment on, I was determined to face whatever came next with courage, to reclaim my space, and, perhaps, to transform this chaotic mess into a chance for a new beginning. Because ultimately, real power lies not in vengeance, but in the strength to reach out and connect, even with those who may seem impossible to understand. I still needed help, but this time, it was to gather ideas on how to foster a sense of community, to build relationships rather than destroy them. I was ready for a new chapter, one that focused not on revenge but on harmony. And with that realization, I took a step back from the precipice of chaos and began to walk toward a brighter future, one conversation at a time. Alright, folks, this is where things get creative. I've spent sleepless nights plotting, thinking of ways to execute a plan that would get under Mark's skin without resorting to sabotage or anything too drastic. My intention isn't to become the villain, it's to remind him that his arrogance has consequences. With that in mind, here's the detailed plan I've crafted, a series of clever, light-hearted inconveniences to nudge him toward humility while keeping the neighborhood peace in mind. 1. The Prankster's Scavenger Hunt. I'll create a neighborhood scavenger hunt that involves Mark's precious lawn. I'll invite our neighbors to participate, giving them a list of playful items to find in Mark's yard, things like a rubber chicken, a gnome wearing sunglasses, and a collection of colorful pool floats. Each item will be placed discreetly but in such a way that it's visible enough to be noticed. The goal isn't to destroy anything but to fill his yard with unexpected, comical surprises that will make him the talk of the neighborhood, all while keeping the tone playful. 2. The Barbecue Bonanza. It's time for a neighborhood barbecue, but here's the twist, I'll check with the HOA to reserve the park for a community get-together on a Saturday when Mark typically has his loud parties. I'll send invites to everyone, subtly hinting that it would be fantastic for them to enjoy a relaxing Saturday afternoon with games, food, and fun right when Mark is planning his next bash. This way, his loud music won't be the only sound echoing through our suburb, it'll be laughter and camaraderie from the community uniting against the noise pollution he creates. 3. The Mysterious Noise Complaint. In collaboration with a couple of neighbors who share my frustrations, I plan to submit ambiguous noise complaints to the HOA every time Mark throws a party. The complaints will be vague enough so that they can't be attributed directly to me, like disturbing sounds late at night without specifying what those sounds are. It'll create a ripple effect, and eventually, Mark will find himself questioned by the HOA about his noise levels. For someone who thrives on being the center of attention, being called out for rowdiness will be a significant blow to his ego. 4. The Gardening Gambit. I will plant a flower bed in the front yard that mirrors Mark's prized garden but with a quirky twist. In between my beloved flowers, I'll add wild elements like brightly colored painted rocks or whimsical garden decorations to create a contrast that's impossible to ignore. I'll make sure the arrangement is vibrant and eye-catching, so much so that it almost feels like a challenge. When he sees my playful rebellion, it'll serve as a reminder of how far he went to belittle my gardening skills. 5. The Community Newsletter. I'll start writing a monthly community newsletter, spotlighting the positive aspects of our neighborhood while subtly addressing issues like noise pollution. In a lighthearted tone, I'll include sections dedicated to noisy neighbors of the month and focus on promoting understanding and compassion among neighbors. It'll be cheeky, think let's all be the type of neighbor we'd like to have type of vibes. If Mark catches wind of this, he may start to feel the pressure of public perception shifting against him. 6. The Local Hero Initiative. I'll organize a Neighborhood Hero Initiative where we celebrate community members doing good deeds. I'll nominate myself and others who have contributed positively to our street and encourage them to do the same. Who knows? Maybe Mark will want to participate, and I can challenge him to do something beneficial for the community instead of partying every weekend. This can create a platform for conversation about respect and neighborly love, forcing him to reevaluate his approach. 7. The claim to fame: I'm going to create a faux award titled Best Lawn of 2023 and present it to myself, just for fun. To make it even more entertaining, I'll invite Mark over, and during a casual gathering, I'll unveil it while making a lighthearted speech about how a perfect lawn means peace and quiet for the neighborhood. I'll even get a funny trophy with a lawnmower on it. Watching him squirm while I highlight the importance of neighborly respect will be oddly satisfying. 8. Involving local media: if all else fails, I might just reach out to the local newspaper with a lighthearted pitch about our community's quirky neighbors. My intention would be to highlight how everyone can coexist harmoniously, using humorous anecdotes that could include a mention of the loud party next door without directly calling anyone out. If it garners attention, it could bring the consequences of his actions to a larger audience he never expected. With my plan laid out in detail, it's time to put it into action. The beauty of this approach is that it's layered with humor. It doesn't feel aggressive and reflects more on his behavior than my own. The key will be timing and ensuring that each prank or plan unfolds smoothly, keeping the spirit lighthearted and maintaining my integrity throughout the process. Of course, I'll have to tread carefully to avoid crossing the line into vindictiveness, but I'm feeling invigorated by the idea of reclaiming my space without losing sight of who I am. The first step will be the scavenger hunt, and from there, I can build on my ideas, adjusting them as I see fit based on Mark's reactions. Ultimately, I want to create a sense of community that contrasts sharply with Mark's self-absorbed attitude. My hope is that through these clever inconveniences, we can reclaim our neighborhood, not just for me but for everyone who has felt belittled or marginalized because of one arrogant neighbor. Because in the end, it's not just about getting back at Mark, it's about standing up for what's right and reminding him that respect is a two-way street. And who knows? Maybe in the process, I'll even find a way to mend the rift between us, a long shot, but worth a try. Let the games begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air around me crackled with anticipation. I had meticulously plotted my course of action, and tonight marked the beginning of my carefully crafted revenge, a series of lighthearted inconveniences that would disrupt Mark's status quo without igniting an outright war. I could feel the tension coursing through my veins as I stood at the edge of my yard, peering through the slats of the fence that separated our properties. The night was alive with activity as laughter and music spilled from Mark's backyard. I could see the silhouettes of guests dancing, their movements exaggerated in the dim light. A wicked grin crept across my face. This was it, the perfect moment to unleash the first part of my plan. The scavenger hunt would unfold under the veil of his party, a delightful surprise that would make him the unwilling host of chaos. I gathered the supplies I had hidden in my garage, a collection of inflatable flamingos, rubber chickens, and brightly painted rocks. I felt like a mischievous sprite, cloaked in the dark, ready to unleash some whimsy upon this self-absorbed king of the cul-de-sac. My heart raced as I crept toward his yard, fueled by the thrill of executing my plan. The first few items went unnoticed, the music drowned out any sound of my sneaky movements. I planted a rubber chicken right in the center of his meticulously manicured lawn, striking a perfect balance between absurdity and annoyance. Then, I tossed an inflatable flamingo into his pool with a splash that echoed through the night, sending ripples of color across the water's surface. Each item I positioned felt like a little victory, a whimsical jab at the man who had made my life unbearable. But it wasn't until I placed the last flamingo, artfully arranged around the party's gathering point, that I felt a rush of exhilaration wash over me. As I turned to retreat, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the window. There he was, the king of his domain, unaware of the delightful chaos unfolding just outside his carefully curated bubble. As I slipped back into my yard, my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't wait for the reactions from the guests, the laughter, the confusion, the bewilderment that would surely ensue. But I wasn't done just yet. The barbecue bonanza was next on my agenda, and I was determined to make it a night to remember for everyone in the neighborhood, except for Mark. I gathered my neighbors, those who had shared my frustrations, and invited them to the park the following weekend for the community barbecue. As we set up, the air buzzed with Excitement and camaraderie, a stark contrast to the discord Mark had sown. Our laughter echoed through the warm evening air, and I could feel the tension melting away as we grilled burgers and shared stories, creating a tapestry of connection that had been missing for so long. But I still needed to make my point clear. I took a moment to send a text to Mark, letting him know about the barbecue and inviting him to join. "Hey Mark, we're having a neighborhood barbecue in the park this Saturday. It'll be great to see everyone together. Let's celebrate our community." I hit send, my heart racing. Would he have the humility to join us? Or would he simply ignore the invitation, continuing his reign of singularity? As we gathered around, neighbors began to trickle in, bringing dishes to share, and I couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration that surged through me. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled food, and laughter filled the space, a sound I hadn't enjoyed in ages, overshadowed for so long by Mark's loud parties. At the height of our gathering, I noticed a figure approaching in the distance, unmistakable in the fading light. It was Mark, striding toward us with a mixture of curiosity and irritation etched on his face. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swelling within me. Would he confront me in front of everyone, or would we find a way to bridge this gap? As he reached the edge of the gathering, I approached him, a smile plastered on my face. "Hey, Mark. Glad you could make it." He raised an eyebrow, looking around at the crowd with a forced smile. "What's all this? A party without me? I thought I was the life of the neighborhood." "Just trying to foster community spirit, Mark," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You know, something we've all been missing for a while." He scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. "Is that what this is? A bunch of neighbors trying to gang up on me?" I could feel the tension in the air, but I pushed through. "No, it's not about that. It's about reminding ourselves what it means to be a community. You don't have to throw parties for everyone to have fun together." For a moment, silence hung between us. The laughter of the neighbors faded into the background, and I could sense the weight of his pride pressing down on him. Just as I began to doubt whether this conversation was worth it, a neighbor stepped forward, offering Mark a plate of food. "Hey Mark, grab a burger. It's good to see you here." To my surprise, Mark hesitated but then took the plate, joining the gathering. As the evening wore on, we engaged in small talk, and I could see subtle shifts happening around us, other neighbors welcoming him, forcing him to participate in this community feel. The tension was still there, but it was beginning to soften under the weight of shared stories and laughter. Just as I thought the night couldn't get any better, I caught sight of my eldest neighbor, Mr. Thompson, making his way toward Mark. "You know, Mark," he began, "your parties are definitely lively, but don't you think a little balance wouldn't hurt? We'd love to have you join us more often. We want to get to know you better, be a part of this community, and honestly, we could use some of that energy on a weeknight too." Mark stared, caught off guard by the unexpected push from Mr. Thompson. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the bravado in his posture faltering. "Yeah, maybe I could swing by," he grumbled, the arrogance slowly seeping away from his tone. As the evening drew to a close, Mark and I found ourselves standing side by side, the previous animosity replaced with an unspoken understanding. He turned to me, a hint of vulnerability flashing in his eyes. I didn't realize how much I'd isolated myself. Maybe I should be more involved. "I appreciate you reaching out." My heart swelled. This was a moment of poetic justice, a small victory for the woman who once felt powerless. In confronting Mark while managing to maintain a sense of humor and community, I'd reminded him that his arrogance came with consequences, and that perhaps, even he could learn to be humble among neighbors. As we wrapped up the barbecue, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. My journey hadn't been about revenge at all, it had been about reclaiming my place in the neighborhood while also challenging Mark to look beyond his ego. With every moment spent laughing and connecting, we were redefining our relationships, turning an enemy into a potential ally. As the stars twinkled above, I realized that revenge had morphed into something far more powerful, the chance for healing, growth, and a renewed sense of community. I went to bed that night, not just feeling victorious but liberated, no longer shackled by anger but instead surrounded by the warmth of friendship and understanding. Perhaps, just perhaps, Mark and I could forge a new path forward. And as I drifted into a peaceful sleep, I understood that sometimes the most satisfying rebellions come not from petty revenge but from compassion and forgiveness, a lesson I would carry with me long after the final echoes of laughter faded into the night. The days following our barbecue were filled with a mixture of anticipation and reflection. In the wake of what I had once envisioned as a grand act of revenge, I found myself caught in an unexpected cycle of growth and transformation. I had stepped into the realm of confrontation, and instead of chaos, I was met with the possibility of reconciliation. Mark's shift was palpable. His posture softened as he engaged with the neighborhood in ways I hadn't thought possible. He began to host less ostentatious gatherings, opting for quieter afternoons filled with barbecues that included the very neighbors he had once dismissed. I watched as he made an effort, contributing his culinary skills and slowly dismantling the barriers he had built around himself. This was the same man who had once ridiculed my flowers, and yet here he was, actively participating in discussions about community improvement and engagement. I found myself torn. Had I inadvertently made a friend out of an enemy? As my initial thrill of victory faded, I felt a mix of relief and discomfort. I had wanted to inconvenience Mark, to remind him of his arrogance and how it affected all of us. But instead, I had given him a chance to reflect and grow. My heart grappled with the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, people could change if given the opportunity. Jake, my son, noticed the changes too. He had been skeptical of me at first, the pranks, the plots, the focus on revenge. But as Mark started to engage more with our family, inviting Jake to join in his backyard soccer games, I could see the walls of discomfort begin to crumble. My son's laughter filled the air once more, and I was reminded of the primary driving force behind my actions, the well-being of my family. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still felt the echoes of resentment that had once fueled my every interaction with Mark. When neighbors would chat about his newfound civility, I caught myself brushing off the compliments with a twinge of indignation. It was hard to reconcile my initial instincts with the man he had become, and sometimes I found myself resentful of the fact that he seemed to be basking in the glow of redemption without fully acknowledging the pain he had inflicted on me and others. One afternoon, while pruning the flowers in my garden that I had grown to love, I caught a glimpse of Mark through the slats of the fence, tossing a soccer ball with Jake. An unexpected wave of emotion washed over me, pride, relief, and an overwhelming sense of bittersweet loss. My plan had worked, but at what cost? I had aimed for revenge, only to craft a bridge instead. That evening, as I settled into the soft embrace of my couch, I pondered everything that had transpired. My thoughts drifted back to my initial resolve, the desire for a small measure of justice. In the end, I found myself grappling with a deeper realization. I had gone into this journey seeking revenge, and yet I emerged with something much more profound, a chance to foster compassion and growth, not only for myself but for those around me. A few weeks later, as the summer days shortened and the crisp air of autumn began to seep in, I received an unexpected text from Mark. "Hey Joanna, I'm planning a neighborhood cleanup day next Saturday. We're all in this together, right? Hope you and your family can join." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. It was a simple invitation, but it was also a challenge, a way for us both to officially acknowledge the shift in our relationship. I realized that although Mark had changed, I had to meet him halfway. I responded with enthusiasm, eager to support the initiative while also grateful for the evolution of our neighborly connection. As that Saturday dawned bright and clear, I stood alongside Mark, a stark contrast to the animosity that had once defined our interactions. The neighborhood came alive with laughter and teamwork as we pulled weeds, picked up litter, and shared stories. It was a newfound camaraderie, and I couldn't shake the feeling of hope that filled the air. At one point, as we took a break, Mark turned to me. "I owe you an apology, Joanna. I didn't realize how blind I'd become to the community around me. Thank you for pushing me to be a better neighbor." In that moment, all the anger and resentment I had harbored began to dissolve. I nodded, understanding the complexities of change and growth. "And I appreciate you being willing to listen," I replied, my voice steady. "Sometimes it just takes a little nudge to see what really matters." As the sun set over our neighborhood that evening, I realized I had come full circle. What began as a quest for petty revenge had transformed into a journey of empowerment and connection, an opportunity to foster community instead of division. I had confronted my anger, embraced my vulnerability, and forged a new path forward not just for myself, but for everyone around me. Sometimes, I thought, the greatest victories come not from striking back but from reaching out. In the end, it didn't matter whether I inconvenienced my neighbor or not. What truly resonated was the knowledge that I could choose compassion over chaos, understanding over indignation. As I lay in bed that night, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not for my cunning plans but for the unexpected friendships that emerged from the depths of conflict. It was a reminder that every relationship, regardless of its rocky beginnings, holds the potential for healing and transformation. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, my heart lighter than it had felt in a long time, the remnants of anger finally giving way to hope, peace, and the blossoming of newfound connections. Because in the grand tapestry of life, each thread, each clash, and each gentle understanding stitched together the fabric of our shared existence, a vibrant community, alive and thriving, forged in the fires of conflict and the embers of friendship. So, if you find yourself in a similar situation, remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against arrogance isn't revenge, it's humanity and the willingness to be better, together.
Hi, I'm Kimberly. I'm a 28-year-old graphic designer living in the heart of Seattle. The city's skyline always makes me feel small, but that wasn't the only thing dwarfing me during that stormy season of my life. I never thought I'd find myself caught in a web of deception, but there I was, blinded by love, my heart heavy with betrayal. I want to share my story of heartbreak and revenge, but honestly, it's still hard for me to unpack all of it. It feels like I'm pulling at threads of a tapestry I thought had been woven with honesty, only to discover they were nothing but frayed lies. At the center of this story is Ryan, my ex-boyfriend, who at first seemed perfect. He was charming, funny, and had that electric smile that made my heart skip a beat. We met at a local coffee shop, where instead of my usual black coffee, I ordered a caramel macchiato on a whim, a decision that changed the course of my life. Ryan was everything I thought I wanted: ambitious, intelligent, and always ready with a witty quip to lighten the mood. I let my guard down as he skillfully navigated through my trust and insecurities, wrapping me in a cocoon of his affection. Little did I know, I was spiraling deep into a relationship built on manipulation and deceit. Then there was Jessica, my best friend since childhood. We swore we would always have each other's backs, through thick and thin. But as fate would have it, she became a pivotal character in this twisted tale, and not in the way I had ever imagined. I never thought I'd feel the sting of betrayal from her, a friend who knew my deepest secrets and insecurities, yet became unwittingly entangled in a plot that would ultimately break my heart. As I sit here, reminiscing about those harrowing days, I can still feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The city lights flicker outside my window, but they pale in comparison to the fire that ignited within me. It's a fire fueled by anger and a desire for justice, a commitment to reclaim my narrative when I learned that the people I trusted the most were nothing but puppeteers in a cruel game. This is not a story of petty grievances or misunderstandings. No, this is a tale of betrayal so deep that it left scars on my heart and unmoored my trust in the very fabric of my life. The first cracks in my seemingly perfect world appeared one evening when I noticed Ryan behaving differently. He would receive late-night messages, his eyes darting away when I entered the room, as if I was a detective who might expose a hidden crime. I chalked it up to stress from work. He was ambitious, after all, always chasing some elusive promotion. But the nagging feeling in my stomach grew heavier with each passing day. Then one fateful Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out the clutter of my apartment, I stumbled upon a small envelope tucked away in a drawer. It was addressed to Ryan but had no return address. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a neatly folded card that carried the unmistakable scent of perfume. As I read the words scrawled in elegant handwriting, my world shattered. It was a love letter, one that spoke of passion, longing, and secrets. It was from Jessica. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent countless hours confiding in her about my dreams of a future with Ryan, sharing my fears and insecurities as I built a life with him, only to find out she had been orchestrating a different kind of symphony altogether. A sick feeling of disbelief washed over me. How could she? I felt my heart sink into a bottomless pit of anguish, confusion, and rage. How could my best friend, the one person I thought would never betray me, be complicit in the manipulation that was unraveling before my eyes? As the days rolled into weeks, I confronted Ryan. The look in his eyes shifted from surprise to guilt as he stammered apologies, trying to explain away his betrayal. It was a mistake, he pleaded, it didn't mean anything. But it did mean something. To me, it meant a lifetime of trust was being tossed aside like yesterday's trash. While Ryan was trying to justify his actions, I couldn't shake the image of Jessica's face, the one person I had let into my heart. I realized that the very foundation of our friendship was built on a lie. The sweet memories we shared, the laughter we echoed through the years, it all felt tainted, as if someone had spilled ink on a cherished photograph. Everything I had shared with her now felt raw and exposed, like a wound that refused to heal. In the aftermath of that confrontation, I became a shadow of my former self. I deleted their numbers, I unfollowed them on social media, but there was no magic button to erase the memories. I spiraled into a pit of despair, replaying their betrayal over and over again in my mind. I found myself questioning every interaction, every moment we had shared. Was it all an act? Was I a fool for believing in their love? It wasn't just the emotional toll that drained me, my work began to suffer. I was a graphic designer, someone whose creativity relied on clarity and inspiration, and yet, I found myself staring blankly at my screen, unable to summon a single spark of imagination. My colleagues noticed the change, and whispers of concern, tinged with pity, followed me around the office. "Is everything okay with Kimberly?" they would ask, but all I could muster was a forced smile that felt like a brittle mask. As my world dimmed, Ryan seemed to thrive in the chaos he had created. It was infuriating. He started dating someone new, a girl from his office, someone who resembled Jessica in looks and demeanor. My stomach turned every time I saw their photos on social media, each like and comment cutting deeper than the last. It was like watching a movie where the villain was thriving after destroying the protagonist's life. It felt so surreal, watching him move on so effortlessly while I was left picking up the pieces of my shattered self-esteem. But the worst part came when Jessica reached out, a week after the storm broke. She texted me, apologizing profusely, insisting she was sorry and wanted to talk. I was paralyzed with anger. How dare she think I would ever want to hear her excuses? I thought about our shared memories, the trust we had built over the years, and how quickly it had all crumbled beneath the weight of their betrayal. I ignored her message, feeling the simmering rage bubbling within me. It felt like betrayal had become a poison coursing through my veins, and I had no idea how to extract it. Days turned into weeks, and I began to see a therapist who helped me sift through the pain and confusion. "You can't control their actions, but you can control how you respond to them," she advised gently. The words resonated deep within me, igniting a flicker of defiance that had seemingly extinguished under the weight of betrayal. For the first time since everything unraveled, I felt an ember of determination kindling in my chest. The turning point came late one night while I was scrolling through social media, seeking solace in the digital noise of the outside world. I stumbled upon a photo of Ryan and his new girlfriend, faces illuminated by a golden sunset, as they shared a kiss that felt like a knife twisting in my heart. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was done being a victim of their lies. I was done wallowing in a pit of despair. It was time for me to reclaim my power. I thought back to everything, A flood of memories washed over me, filled with his sweet words and her laughter, and I felt this burning need for justice. They thought they could shatter me, but they had underestimated my resolve. That night, I realized I could turn this pain into something greater. Instead of allowing betrayal to break me, I could let it fuel my fire. I spent the next few days channeling all that rage and hurt into a plan. I harnessed my skills as a graphic designer, creating a series of illustrations that reflected the turbulent emotions I had buried for too long. Each design became a cathartic outlet, a way for me to express the hurt, the betrayal, and ultimately, the empowerment I was beginning to feel. With every stroke of my pen, I felt lighter. I envisioned a series of art pieces that would encapsulate my experience, but more importantly, I envisioned a way to turn the narrative around. But my plan didn't stop at art. I devised a strategy that would intertwine my designs with a public reveal, an art exhibition titled Behind the Masks. I decided to showcase my journey through these illustrations, from the joyful highs to the devastating lows, as a way of reclaiming the narrative they had stolen from me. I would let the world see how they had hurt me, but also how I had risen from the ashes of that pain. In the weeks leading up to the event, I transformed my apartment into a makeshift studio, working late into the night. I poured every ounce of my heartbreak into those pieces. I designed graphics that represented the duplicity of love and friendship, depicting broken hearts with strings attached, and vibrant colors contrasting the darkness that had pervaded my life. My artwork became my armor. Hey, I'm Kimberly. If you're listening to this, I guess you could say I'm deep in the throes of a twisted tale, one I never expected to live out. It's raw, it's personal, and it might just hit close to home for some of you. So grab a seat, because this story is a roller coaster, and it all starts in the bustling heart of Chicago, where beneath the shimmering skyline, I found myself entangled with a man who would turn my world upside down. The moment I met Derek, it was as if he had stepped straight out of a romance novel. With his charming smile and that effortless charisma, he could light up the darkest rooms. Everyone adored him, and at first, so did I. He was the life of every party, the guy who effortlessly navigated conversations and had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. But, as they say, nothing is ever as it seems. We met at a trendy coffee shop called The Daily Grind, a place filled with the rich aroma of fresh espresso and the sound of clinking cups. I had just moved to the city, struggling to find my footing after a tough breakup, and Derek seemed to embody everything I thought I wanted. We hit it off instantly, or at least I thought we did. Little did I know, I had unknowingly signed up for a masterclass in manipulation. My closest friends, Sarah and Mia, were wary of Derek from the start. They'd roll their eyes and give me that knowing look whenever I mentioned him, but I brushed aside their concerns. "You're just jealous," I'd chuckle, oblivious to the cracks that were beginning to form in the facade he had so skillfully crafted. They couldn't see what I saw, the dreamy moments, the late-night conversations filled with laughter. They hadn't felt the rush of excitement that came with every text from him. But it didn't take long for the reality to seep in, like a slow poison. Over the course of the months, the charming persona began to unravel. With Derek, love was an illusion wrapped in a shiny bow, but soon, that bow began to fray. His need for validation morphed into control. Every compliment he'd given me was laced with a condition, and every loving moment was followed by a sting, a reminder that I was never quite good enough. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself caught in his web. Friends and family became distant memories. I was isolated, a prisoner in my own mind, questioning my worth with every dismissive glance he threw my way. I watched helplessly as he perfected the art of gaslighting, turning my reality into something I couldn't recognize. But here's the twist that no one saw coming, not even me. It was during one of those late-night conversations when he casually mentioned his ex-girlfriend, Emily, with such disdain that it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he spoke, the venom behind every syllable. That's when the seed of revenge was planted in my heart, and from then on, it would grow into a twisted obsession. Now, as I sit here, recounting this bizarre chapter of my life, I realize that revenge isn't just a plot in a story, it's a journey, a path I never wanted to walk, but here I am, ready to take the first step. And this time, it's my turn to be heard. It's time to face the narcissist of the highest caliber and show him that I won't be silenced any longer. So, buckle up as I unveil the thrilling and dark details of my plan, the lessons learned, and the indelible mark this experience has left on me. Revenge may not be sweet, but oh, was it ever satisfying. The day everything changed began like any other. The sun streamed through my apartment window, filtering through the thin curtains as I sipped my morning coffee, an elixir of hope I clung to in the dwindling light of my reality. Derek had stayed over, his presence a magnet that drew me in, yet I felt horrified by the shadows lurking behind his charming smile. That day, I should have sensed the storm brewing beneath the surface. Instead, I was blissfully ignorant. I had planned a dinner for us, hoping to rekindle the magic we once had. I wanted to show him that I still believed in us, that I still believed in love. I meticulously prepared his favorite meal, hoping to recreate those early days filled with laughter and warmth. As I stirred the sauce, my heart raced with excitement. Finally, I thought, maybe tonight would be different. But the moment he walked in, his expression shifted. I felt that familiar chill creep down my spine as he glanced around, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face as he realized I hadn't done enough. "Did you actually think I'd want to just eat at home tonight?" he sneered, shrugging off my efforts as if they were nothing more than a pathetic joke. My heart plummeted. I had poured my soul into that meal, and he had tossed it away like yesterday's trash. Trying to regain my footing, I suggested a nice restaurant nearby. But instead of appreciation, I was met with a dismissive wave as he turned toward his phone. He was scrolling, immersed in his own world while I stood there, a ghost in my own home, feeling the walls close in around me. Hours later, after yet another failed attempt at connection, I snapped. "Why do you treat me like this? Why do you make me feel so small?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and defeat. He looked up from his screen, genuinely taken aback, as if he had no idea what I was talking about. "Oh, come on, Kimberly. You're being dramatic," he replied, veering into that all too familiar territory, belittlement. "You're lucky to be with me. Just look at yourself. A little self-awareness would go a long way." Those words cut deeper than any knife. It felt as if he had stripped away my entire identity, layer by layer, leaving me raw and exposed. Had I really let myself be reduced to this trembling shadow of who I once was? The realization crashed over me like a wave, and suddenly, the memory of Emily resurfaced, haunting me like a specter. I remembered how he had disparaged her, how he'd made her seem vindictive and malicious when all I could see was a woman who had once loved him. I felt her pain morphing with my own, intertwining in a desperate plea for justice. That night, it hit me, Derek didn't just manipulate me, he was a master of emotional destruction, a narcissist who needed to feel superior at all costs. I had been a pawn in his game, but not anymore. In that moment of anguish, something inside me snapped, igniting a fire that I never knew existed. I could either wallow in my misery or channel that rage toward something more powerful, something that would show Derek the truth of his own cruelty. The next day, I turned my focus toward Emily. I reached out to her, my fingers trembling as I typed the message. I told her everything, how he spoke of her, how he treated me, and how I had seen the cracks in his facade. Through exchanged words, I found a friend in her, a a comrade who had suffered at the hands of a man who had no regard for anyone but himself. Little did Derek know, I was beginning to plot a way to expose him, to unveil the intricate web of lies he had spun around all of us. As I worked with Emily to gather evidence of Derek's manipulation, text messages, stories of emotional abuse, and shared experiences, I could feel my resolve strengthening. No longer would I remain a victim, cowering in the shadows of his toxic behavior. I wanted Derek to feel the same despair, the same sense of loss that he had inflicted on so many. With each passing day, my emotions transformed from sorrow to determination. I was no longer just Kimberly, the love-struck girl. I was a force to be reckoned with, fueled by the betrayal and injustice I had endured. As I prepared to set my plan in motion, the realization settled in that revenge might not only offer satisfaction but a sense of closure I had yearned for since the very beginning. And so began my journey of vengeance, drawing the curtain back on the narcissist of the highest caliber, Derek, who had underestimated the strength that lay dormant within me. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed a shift in my demeanor. The quiet resolve I had uncovered began to give way to a darker energy, a thrill that coursed through me with each piece of evidence I gathered against Derek. My emotions, once a chaotic storm of love, confusion, and despair, turned into a laser-focused mission. However, as I delved deeper, things escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. Derek was clever. He could sense the change in me, the way I had begun to stand my ground during our conversations. His charm faded into annoyance. One evening, we were out with friends, and I dared to laugh a little too freely, sharing an inside joke with Mia. I could feel his gaze burning into me, his hostility palpable. Afterward, he pulled me aside, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're so funny, don't you? You think your little games will make me forget who's in control?" The threat hung heavy in the air, and I felt the cocktail of fear and anger twist in my stomach. But it only fueled my resolve. I was no longer a puppet dancing to his tune, I was the knife hidden beneath the silk. Each verbal jab he threw my way, every belittling comment, solidified my plan. It became a sick game, who could outwit the other. I toyed with the idea that if he was going to play the villain, I might as well play the part of an avenger. Then there was that night, the night that would ignite the chain of events that would lead to my ultimate confrontation with him. I had spent hours preparing for a party Derek was throwing at his apartment. As I set out my outfit, something daring, something confident, I felt empowered. But the moment I walked through the door, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, I was hit with a tidal wave of Derek's narcissistic energy. His attention was fixed on me, but it wasn't admiration I saw, it was barely contained contempt. "Wow, you clean up nice, Kimberly," he said, with a smirk. "Did you pull out all the stops for me tonight?" His friends laughed, but it was the way he said it, like I was a cheap, hastily assembled outfit he picked up at a discount store. I held my chin high, the resolve I'd been nurturing bubbling to the surface. "I'd say I'm dressing for myself, not just for you," I replied, feeling an unfamiliar heaviness lift from my chest. But that only seemed to agitate him more. Throughout the night, he would make snide remarks, cutting glances in my direction whenever I engaged with others. It became an unbearable game of humiliation. He was artfully weaving a narrative that turned everyone against me, painting me as dramatic and overreactive. As the laughter of his friends echoed through the room, I felt invisible, drowning in my own agony while he thrived in his kingdom of narcissism. The tension was suffocating. I had to get out. I excused myself and stepped out onto the balcony, cold air wrapping around me like a lifeline. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Emily. "Don't let him get to you. Remember, you're strong. You can do this." Tears stung my eyes as I read her words. She had become my anchor in this storm. I took a deep breath, wiping my eyes and trying to reclaim the courage I felt slipping away. But just then, the door swung open, and there he stood, Derek, the embodiment of chaos. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his tone sharp, slicing through the serene night. "Hiding? You know, you're not that special. Don't think you can just decide when to show others your little strong side." I felt that mix of anger and despair crash into me again. "I'm not hiding. I'm taking a moment because being around you is exhausting," I fired back, each word resonating with the determination I had been cultivating. His eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, invading my personal space, his breath hot against my face. "You think you're tough, huh? You're just a scared little girl trying to prove herself. You don't want to mess with me, Kimberly. You have no idea who you're dealing with." His threats sent shivers down my spine, but within me, that fire blazed brighter. I wasn't scared. I was emboldened. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze unflinchingly, and in that moment, I realized how far I'd come. The little girl he once berated was now on the cusp of destroying the very foundation of his carefully crafted world. My heart raced as I held my ground, feeling the tension pulsate between us like an electric current. Derek's face contorted with rage, and I relished the madness in his eyes. He thought he could intimidate me, toy with my emotions like I was a marionette dangling on strings he controlled. But as I stood there, bathed in the pale light of the moon, I felt a shift inside me, an awakening, a clarity that sliced through the fog of despair he had wrapped around me. "You don't scare me anymore," I declared, the words spilling from my lips like molten lava, hot and fierce. A strange sense of power surged through me, igniting that ember of revenge I'd been nursing for weeks. In his twisted world where he wore the crown, I suddenly saw the path laid out before me. What if I could turn the tables and show him that the very tactics he used to manipulate and belittle could be his downfall? In that moment, I recalled how he had spoken of Emily, his ex-girlfriend, with such venom. It had ignited something in me then, but standing here now, it felt like a complete revelation. I no longer wanted just to survive, I wanted to dismantle his empire of deceit brick by brick. I envisioned Emily by my side, the two of us standing tall against the tide of Derek's narcissism. He had painted us both as weak, but together, we could be formidable. "Tell me, Derek," I pressed, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning within. "What are you so afraid of? Is it that I might actually stand up for myself? That I might expose you for who you really are?" For a moment, he looked taken aback, as if my words were foreign to him. His bravado wavered, and I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Was he truly the all-powerful ruler he believed himself to be? "I'm not afraid of you, Kimberly," he spat, but I could hear the lie woven into his tone. "You're nothing without me." And that's when it hit me. The realization burned brighter than anything I'd felt before. I had spent so long believing I was nothing without him, that I needed his validation to be whole. But in this moment, in this raw confrontation, I felt the shackles of his control shatter around me. I was not just the girl he had manipulated, I was a woman rediscovering her strength. It was time to take action. I was ready to harness this newfound clarity and use it as a weapon. I had the power to expose him, not just to myself but to everyone in his carefully curated world. He had crafted a narrative where he reigned supreme, but I realized that I could rewrite that story, our story. The thought of Emily standing by my side filled me with determination. I could almost hear her laughter, feel her unwavering support echoing through my mind. Together, we could make him regret ever underestimating us. I wanted Derek to feel the very loneliness he had inflicted upon me, to face the emptiness of a world stripped of his facade. The plan began to take shape in my mind, crystallizing like a clear picture in a foggy room. I needed to gather evidence, text messages, voicemails, any trace of his cruel words and manipulative tactics, and I needed to do it fast. I imagined a confrontation that would leave him exposed and vulnerable, revealing the monster beneath the charming mask. Suddenly, I saw myself standing before a gathering of friends, the very people he had manipulated into believing his lies. I would unveil the truth, letting darkness spill into the light. The only way to eradicate a narcissist of the highest caliber was to shine the spotlight directly on him, and I was ready to take that step. As I turned to walk back into the party, I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. The shadows of uncertainty and self-doubt began to dissipate, replaced with a fierce determination. Derek would no longer be the puppeteer pulling my strings, he would face the consequences of his actions. With Emily's support and my resolve, I was no longer a victim, I was a warrior ready to wage war against the man who had tried to steal my light. As I stepped back into the party, I felt a smile dance on my lips, a predatory smile filled with purpose. I would make Derek pay, not out of spite but to reclaim the narrative he had woven around our lives. I was ready to step into the darkness and confront the narcissist of the highest caliber, and I would emerge victorious. I spent the next few days spiraling with excitement and anxiety, plotting every detail of the plan that would serve justice, not only to Derek but also to the countless others who had fallen victim to his charm. The scheme unfolded like a blueprint in my mind, each layer intricately designed to expose him in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. The foundation of my plan hinged on concrete proof of his manipulative behavior. I contacted Emily, and together, we started documenting everything. We crafted a shared folder on Google Drive, a secret repository for our evidence. I gathered screenshots of all the text messages where Derek belittled me, where he flirted with other women while I languished in silence. I even recorded his voice during our conversations, where the insidious gaslighting seeped out like poison. Emily shared her experiences, recalling Derek's condescending messages, his dismissive comments, the times he had belittled her achievements. It was cathartic for both of us to validate each other's pain. We were no longer isolated victims. Instead, we became allies against a common enemy. Our compilation of evidence grew daily. Each entry filled me with a mix of dread and excitement, as if I were collecting ammunition for the battle ahead. But I kept reminding myself that this was not just about revenge, this was about reclaiming our identities and standing up against his brand of cruelty. Next, I set out to cultivate a network of allies. I reached out to mutual friends to gauge their perspectives about Derek, subtly steering conversations toward stories of his behavior. Some friends revealed their discomfort with how he treated me, while others admitted they had witnessed similar moments of his arrogance and condescension with Emily. The more I sought out these opinions, the more emboldened I felt. Mia and Sarah played pivotal roles in preparing for the climax of my plan. They were fiercely loyal and supportive and offered to be part of the gathering I envisioned, a gathering where Derek would finally be held accountable. I began painting a picture of a dinner party, an evening where everyone would have a chance to contribute to the conversation, to shed light on the toxic nature of Derek's behavior. I secured a date for the get-together, an elaborate dinner at my apartment. I meticulously planned the details, aiming to create an atmosphere that felt warm and inviting, yet charged with tension. I invited close friends who were already skeptical of Derek, those who had seen his true colors but hadn't had the opportunity to express their feelings in front of him. On the night of the dinner, the table was set to perfection, adorned with candles and delicate floral arrangements. But behind the facade of normalcy, I felt the weight of anticipation in the air. Emily arrived early, and we shared a knowing glance. Our battle was about to begin. As guests trickled in, the energy shifted. Laughter and chatter filled the room, but I felt my heart race as I anticipated Derek's arrival. When he finally walked through the door, I could see the flicker of arrogance in his eyes, the charming smile ready to distract everyone from the truth lurking beneath his surface. Dinner progressed with typical small talk, but I knew the time would come soon. As we shifted to the living room, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. It was time to unveil the truth. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my moment. "Thanks for coming, everyone," I began, my voice steady despite the quiver of excitement flooding through me. "Tonight, I wanted to celebrate friendship, and also to shed light on something serious. I know Derek has shared stories of his past relationships, particularly with Emily, and I believe it's essential that we discuss the impact his behavior has had on those around him." Gasps erupted from some of my friends, while others exchanged furtive glances. Derek's face paled. For a moment, the mask slipped. "Are you serious?" he scoffed, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "This is ridiculous. I thought this was a friendly dinner, not an attack." I pressed on, undeterred. "This is an important conversation, Derek. We're all friends here, and friends should support one another. Emily, would you like to share your experiences?" As Emily stood to speak, I could see Derek's expression shift from incredulous amusement to a mask of growing panic. He opened and closed his mouth, searching for words but unable to form a coherent response. Emily's voice rang out, powerful and unwavering, as she recounted the moments of emotional manipulation she had endured, the feelings of inadequacy that had plagued her long after their relationship ended. Step 5. The tension in the room thickened as Emily spoke, her voice steady and filled with emotion. Her words poured out like a dam bursting, igniting memories and feelings among the guests that had long been buried. "I thought I was crazy, you know. I believed I was the problem," she said, her gaze unwavering as she turned to Derek. "But now I see that it was you all along. You twisted my reality until I no longer recognized myself." Derek's face flushed crimson, the mask of charm slipping further as sweat beaded on his forehead. The laughter and lightness of the evening were replaced by a palpable tension, with everyone hanging on Emily's every word. "I remember the moments when you would play mind games with me, Derek," she continued, her voice rising with conviction. "Every time I tried to voice my feelings, you'd turn it around on me, making me feel like I was overreacting. It was suffocating." I could feel Derek's eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally, a foothold in the chaos unfolding around him. But the faces of our friends, Mia, Sarah, and even some of Derek's own buddies, had transformed from friendly smiles into expressions of concern and empathy. The power dynamic was shifting, and I reveled in it. "Listen, this is all nonsense," Derek interjected sharply, desperation creeping into his tone. "You're both just bitter ex-girlfriends trying to ruin my night. You need to grow up." "Is that really your defense?" I shot back, cutting through his attempt at dismissal like a knife. "Do you think calling us bitter will erase the truth? You've spent your life creating this illusion, this perfect facade, and it's time we brought it crashing down." As I spoke, I felt a surge of power wash over me. The words felt like a rallying cry, a declaration of my newfound strength. The room felt charged, as if everyone could sense the reckoning at hand. "Let's not forget the countless times you made people feel inferior to you," I continued, my heart racing. "How you belittle Mia's achievements or mock Sarah's dreams. You don't get to play the victim anymore." Derek's facade of confidence began to crack, his snide remarks replaced by a creeping terror as the weight of our words pressed down on him. He was trapped in a corner, and we were the hunters ready to make a kill. "You think you can just bully everyone into silence?" I asked, my voice firm and unyielding. "You've thrived on fear and insecurity, but tonight, that ends. We will not be silenced any longer." The guests began murmuring in agreement, and for the first time, I saw the tide turn. People began to share their own stories, their own moments of discomfort around Derek, moments he had brushed off as trivial. Laughter began to fade as the gravity of what he had done seeped into the atmosphere. One friend, Jason, spoke up. "I remember when you made fun of me for not landing that promotion, Derek. You laughed and said I'd never be good enough for the job. It's time you faced the consequences of your actions." Each voice added weight to our collective truth, and with every word shared, Derek's bravado dwindled. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting back and forth, desperately trying to regain control over the room. But the truth had broken through his carefully constructed walls, and it felt so liberating. "Derek," I said, leaning in slightly to catch his gaze, "you've manipulated all of us for too long. But this isn't just about revenge, it's about healing. It's about reclaiming our power and standing against the toxicity you represent." As I spoke those words, the mood shifted further, almost like the clouds parting to reveal the sun. There was an energy in the room now, a shared understanding of the reality Derek had tried to obscure. The shock on Derek's face morphed into a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You all are just jealous. You can't blame me for your failures," he spat, desperately attempting to shift the narrative. But it was too late. The cracks in his facade were showing, and the unraveling had begun. "Jealous? No, Derek. We're tired," I corrected him calmly. "Tired of feeling like we have to walk on eggshells around you, tired of your egotistical behavior that steals the light from everyone else in the room. It's time for accountability." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's bravado had all but collapsed, leaving him exposed in front of the friends he had once commanded. It was then that I noticed the glimmer of recognition in the air hung heavy in the room after our confrontation, like the final notes of a symphony cascading into silence. Derek stood there, a broken man, stripped of the power he had so skillfully wielded. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, he was no longer in control of the narrative. I felt a mix of exhilaration and disbelief as the weight of everything that had transpired began to settle in. What happened next was almost surreal. With every word spoken against him, I felt a layer of my own pain lifting. Friends who had once viewed me with sympathy now surrounded me with support, offering nods of understanding and words of encouragement. They shared their stories of courage, resilience, and the struggle of breaking free from toxic relationships. It was as though we were weaving an invisible tapestry of healing, each thread intertwining our experiences, casting a warm glow over the room. But for Derek, the atmosphere shifted from one of camaraderie to an abyss of humiliation. He could only stand there, dumbfounded, as the weight of our shared truths pulled him down into despair. Emotional outbursts rolled through his being, first denial, then feigned laughter, and finally, anger bubbling forth like a volcano ready to erupt. "You're all making a mistake," he spat, voice laced with venom. "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm better than all of you." At that moment, the laughter and camaraderie faded into a solemn hush. I watched as my friends exchanged looks of concern, their faces revealing a mixture of sympathy and frustration. They weren't there to judge but to witness the reality of a man who had fully revealed himself, a man who thrived on chaos, who reveled in diminishing others to elevate his own sense of worth. My heart raced as I confronted Derek again. "You don't get to shift the blame anymore. Your words have consequences. We're not here to diminish you, we're here to reclaim our stories. And you've lost all power over us tonight." He took a step back, as if my words physically struck him. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, trying to concoct a plan to regain his footing. But the curtain had been drawn back, and the audience had seen the dark magic behind the puppet show. Derek was no longer the king in his kingdom, he was a man standing in the ruins of his empire, surrounded by the laughter of those who had taken back their joy. As the evening progressed, I noticed how the energy shifted. Friends took turns sharing their own experiences, moments Derek had casually dismissed or belittled. It felt cathartic, like a collective exorcism, as we laid bare the wounds he had inflicted, visible or not. I glanced at Emily, who was beaming with pride as she spoke about her own journey of healing. We had turned from victims into warriors, armed with the truth. When the night finally drew to a close, the guests gradually filtered out, leaving behind a sense of camaraderie and empowerment. My apartment, once a space of chaos and despair, felt like a sanctuary of resilience. Derek had stormed out after the confrontation, his ego shattered and his reputation in tatters, but I felt no remorse for him. He had created this ripple of devastation, and now it was crashing back upon him, unraveling everything he had carefully constructed. In the following days, the aftermath of that dinner party reverberated through my life like an echo. I had expected some backlash. After all, no one ever walks away unscathed from a confrontation with a narcissist. But what I didn't anticipate was the wave of support that flooded in from my friends and family. They rallied around me, emboldened by the stand I had taken. They sent messages, called to check in, and even shared their own experiences of overcoming toxic relationships, bolstering my belief that I had not just conquered Derek, but had also created a safe space for others to find their voices. Yet, as much as I reveled in this newfound empowerment, I couldn't shake the residual feelings of anxiety that crept in. Derek had been a fixture in my life, and his sudden absence left me grappling with the remnants of fear he'd instilled in me. I realized I had to confront the emotional scars he had left behind, the invisible bruises that still lingered beneath the surface. Despite feeling empowered, I decided to seek therapy. I wanted to unlock the chains he'd wrapped around my heart and mind, to explore the depths of my own self-worth beyond the confines of his manipulation. Each session became a journey of rediscovery, where the therapist helped me untangle the threads woven into my psyche, reminding me that I was worthy, strong, and deserving of love. I also learned that revenge doesn't always mean retribution.